Welcome to The Big Picture, a show that takes a deep dive into the political landscape of not only America, but right here in our own backyard of Illinois.
It's showtime, folks.
The Big Picture is on WCPT 820. And now, here's your host, Edwin Eisendrath.
Hello, everybody. Look, I've dispensed with playing the Russian national anthem at the top of the show, but it's not because I don't think we are as much of a dictatorship, anymore. I do. I mean, wow. Last month I told you we were no longer living in a democracy, and I went through the reasons from the collapse of the rule of law to the utter political dependence on the whims of one man, from the attacks on the media and education to the willingness of the MAGA crowd to overturn election results they don't like. That was just a couple weeks ago. And since then, look, a partisan court has tossed out more than 60,000 votes in North Carolina because the Republicans lost. That should never have happened. It never has happened. And it does not happen in a democracy. Now, we'll see if they get away with it. Other courts have yet to rule, but they pushed to overturn the results. And so far, a captured court has helped that effort. Like I said, that's not what we do in a democracy. It's not what we do in a place with a rule of law. And this week, we heard from Alina Habba. If that name sounds familiar to you, it's because she was one of the Trump attorneys who litigated the results of the 2020 election. She was also the Trump attorney who, he hired to sue Hillary Clinton and John Podesta and Debbie Wasserman Schultz and a bunch of others seeking damages for God knows what surrounding the 2016 presidential election. This is how long they've been at it. The judge in that case dismissed the suit as entirely inadequate, and he sanctioned Habba and her co-counsels for their abuse of the legal system. In fact, the judge ordered Habba's firm to pay, I think it was more than $900,000 to Hillary Clinton and James Comey. The judge said, and this is a quote, "No reasonable lawyer would have filed it. Intended for a political purpose, none of the counts of the amended complaint stated a cognizable legal claim." Wow. Well, that same disgraced Alina Habba is now the acting U.S. attorney in New Jersey. Not competence, but loyalty is the only thing that matters, right? And this week she announced that she's ordered her office to investigate that state's Democratic governor and attorney general. For what, you ask? For what? Well, for not complying with Trump's demand that city officials, including police, work with federal government to round up immigrants for deportation. Now, look, whatever you think of immigration, never mind, because the courts have ruled here that sanctuary cities are legal. There is no crime. So Habba isn't even alleging a crime, but she's ordering an investigation. This is not what happens in a democracy. It's what happens in a fascist state. This week, the Supreme Court, with no dissents, affirmed that it was illegal to sweep up an immigrant, a man named Abrigo Garcia, remember that name, and send him to a dungeon in El Salvador. The court ordered a lower court to make sure the administration complies with the law. And yet the next day, in that lower court, the administration's lawyers were back and they were unable to say where Mr. Abrigo Garcia was or what they were doing to get him back. This is perilously close to a dictator saying to the courts they don't matter at all. And look, as mad as I have been about the Roberts Court, and I have a lot, and we all have a lot to be angry about, it's a bridge too far that no one in a democracy would cross to say they should just be ignored. In this particular case, it's also, I don't know what the right words, brazen and cruel rejection of common decency and human dignity. And this week, their fascist villainy extended beyond those in office. Vigilante thugs, maybe even some of the same ones who Trump pardoned for their work on his January 6th insurrection, they've upped their vile game. Across America, judges are getting threats. They're getting death threats. They're getting deliveries to their homes. You know, the pizza delivery that says, we know where you live. And now those deliveries are going to the judge's children's homes. And sometimes those deliveries are made in the name of the son of a federal judge who was murdered by vigilantes earlier in the Trump era. This is standard mobster stuff or Putin stuff. You want your kid to end up like that kid? We're watching. Disgusting. And remember what this is about. Trump's position, and he's been clear about this. Don't let anybody tell you he hasn't. You could find the clips. You could find the arguments in the courts. His position is that anyone, even American citizens, can be snatched and deposited in a foreign dungeon to be forgotten. Stalin would be amazed. And in case there are judges who would say otherwise, well, we got guys for that, right? Disgusting. Not in a democracy, not in a place with the rule of law, not in America. And this has nothing to do with the destruction of all that wealth based on his incompetence with the economy. That's just another side effect of his thinking he can be the world's biggest mobster and shake down whole countries like he's trying to shake down law firms and individual judges. Disgusting. As a young man, I became a teacher. I taught in Chicago's public schools before I got elected to the city council. But some of the people I grew up with became lawyers, and some of them had very successful careers in firms you've likely heard of, because those firms, some of them recently made deals with Trump when he came after them. And from what I hear, the vigilantes are now taking on these individuals in these firms. Hey, we got a case for you. Wait, you're not taking it? I'm going to call Trump. Oh, here's a picture of me with my AK-47. Really? Really? He and his emboldened fascist party think they can force us to stop trying to win back what Lincoln called the last best hope of Earth. Maybe they think we're so preoccupied with the economic disaster he caused not to notice when our democracy dies. Sorry, guys, that badly underestimates us. I know they're winning now, but they won't prevail. All those people I was with last Saturday out on the street in Chicago, but it was happening all over the country. We know they won't prevail. Look, we've seen what they will never see. Now, I'll just say this for myself. I've seen decent people go out of their way to help their neighbors. It's not in their worldview. I've witnessed teachers spend their own money buying supplies their students need when schools lack the funds to provide them. I've observed corporate leaders use their talents to help build communities and staff food banks. I've been in the room when artists use their creativity to lift all of us up when we're down. I've even watched brave Chicagoans stand up to mobsters. I am not young anymore, but I have learned from the evidence of an engaged life that love is stronger than hate, that truth is more powerful, if a little slower to arrive, than lies, and that Americans will not now break faith with the generations who fought and died to protect the light of democracy in a dark and dangerous world. Think about that. In fact, we're going to talk about that a lot in the next couple hours. I have a great set of guests, some of my favorites, people you know, Holly McCall, David Roberts, Michael Tomasky, Dean Baker. So we're going to look at this mess we're in and what we need to do about it from a lot of perspectives. You're going to like all of it. Stay tuned. We'll be back in just a bit.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, so we're hunting down my first guest. I'm sure we'll find her, but in the meantime, maybe this would be a good time to take some of your calls. I don't usually get to do it earlier in the show, and that might be fun at 773-763-9278. And while I wait for that, I think I want to just talk to you about two of Trump's recent, executive orders. I'm not sure if there were two separate ones or one, but, he's targeting individuals now in his executive orders. In this last one, he went after Chris Krebs and Miles Taylor. They they're going to investigate him. They're going to go after him. I mean, it's crazy. Krebs was the guy, he worked for Trump. He was in his administration. Both of them did. But they had the temerity to think for themselves. I mean, Krebs said, yeah, you know what? The 2020 election was secure. It wasn't hacked. And for that, the president of the United States is now attacking him personally and ordering his government to go after him. And Miles Taylor, I mean, I think he had a Homeland Security. He didn't think everything. He thought for himself. I mean, and that's a crime. These guys want to control everything. You think differently, they'll set the government on you, just like Habba is doing in New Jersey, an investigation in search of a crime. This is, oh my gosh, right out of the fascist playbook. Right out of the fascist playbook. I mean, I don't know. Any of you guys afraid of that? I am. Not so afraid that I'm not going to fight back. I mean, I have kids, for gosh sakes. Of course I'm going to fight back. I've told them, I'm not sure they're amused by this, but if we ever get to that Tiananmen Square scenario where, we're all waiting and they're sending the tanks, I promise to be in the front. It's kind of crazy. All right, as I said, 773-763-9278. Let's start in with Jim.
Yeah, hi, Edwin. This is what really frosts me. The Republican voter, the MAGA voter, now they've morphed into the MAGA party. What frosts me is, what about the character of the individual you're voting for? They said that the younger voters didn't show up for, they voted for Trump, saying that he was going to give them economic relief. But what about his character? My goodness, I mean, you don't need a biography on him to know that his character is he's the most criminal person we've ever had in the White House. I mean, how does a person brag to a race car driver on Wednesday that Charles Schwab made $2.5 billion, and he's busting buttons over it? The president of the United States is busting buttons over it, and then he refers to his behind. He uses the vulgar term for it at a Republican fundraiser, whatever it was. I mean, look at the example to the children of America. I mean, what about his character? That's what kills me. Go ahead, Edwin. That's what really kills me.
Hang on. You're raising a really important question. And I want to tell you how much I've had to think about that, because it's really disturbed me. Because I didn't understand it. And it drove me back to a book written in the 1840s called Fear and Trembling by a philosopher named Soren Kierkegaard. He has this section in this book, and it's called it's when he's looking at the binding of Isaac, this part of the Bible where Abraham is told to sacrifice his son and goes along with it. And he calls it a theological suspension of the ethical. He says the truth comes from personal commitment, not objective facts, when you're struck with this leap of religious faith. And that's what's happened to a whole chunk of America. They took the Republican Party into churches, and they made people lose their minds. They've made some leap of faith that's let them suspend their ethical judgment. And that is a death knell for a society.
You got it right on the nose, Edwin. That's right on the nose. But that is the supernatural aspect of this. I mean, this has got a twinge of, I call up these religious departments, the religious programs, and say, my God, you were pushing this criminal on us. You were pushing this insanity on us. Oh, well,
they did.
Yeah, I said, where are you getting your new? I said, well, come on. I mean, examine this man's character.
They didn't care.
I mean, my God. Huh? Yeah, I know. They suspended it.
They threw ethics out the window. Yep, in the name of some greater faith, and it was a false idol.
Yeah, no kidding. Anyway, thank you. That was a good example. Thank you, Edwin. Thank you very much. You have a good bet. It's a good show. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, you guys, 773-763-9278. You know what? I want to talk politics, but I mean, Soren Kierkegaard, I apologize for that. That's really not, Chicago radio stuff. But I have been deeply worried about this phenomena of Americans ignoring what is so plainly in front of their eyes, and particularly when it comes to these ethical questions. Hey, pick somebody off the street, send them to a dungeon in El Salvador, worry about whether you got the right guy later. What license does that give a government? And is that license even possible to have in a free society? It isn't. And yet here we are, and people are like, well, maybe he deserved it. Okay, maybe. Well, okay, figure it out first. Give him his day in court. Maybe he deserved it. Maybe I deserve it. Maybe you deserve it. Who's to decide? Oh, we have a justice system that's supposed to decide. But this just pick them up, get rid of them, and decide later stuff, shoot now, decide later stuff, that is not in the character of a free society. It's not in the ethics of a free society. We've found ourselves here because people have suspended their ethics. And you really have to look and try and figure out why. What makes that happen? Crazy to think what makes that happen. All right, Paul, did you find Holly? Oh, well, hello, Joan.
Hey, Edwin. Holly may not love you, but I do.
Oh, that's sweet. Now, Holly's fabulous, and I hope she's okay, and I hope nothing happened.
Yeah, every once in a while, I think a guest gets confused about the times, or they turn their phone off preemptively. But, hey, I wanted to talk to you about April 19th. I know you were there April 5th for the big demonstration, but a lot of my listeners are texting me in that there's going to be another big demonstration on the 19th, and the hope is that it's even bigger and better. I'm not real familiar. Is it the same thing that's planned for the 19th? Do you know?
Well, you know what? I don't know, but also, I mean, it's another, nationwide anti-Trump rally for sure. And it's planned by many of the same folks who did the hands-off one. I know that, but I'm not sure that I know more details. I know they are planning it. And in fairness, I didn't know many of the details about the April 5th one until except that it was coming until it came, right? Uh-huh. We are kind of new at this stuff. So the organizers, they're organizing people, but they're not as organized as, as a big political party. Because this is coming from the bottoms up. So
yeah.
And that doesn't mean, people want to just be out
ago, I spoke to the McHenry County Democratic women, and one of the things that I said is, there's nobody who's coming to save us. We got to save ourselves. If we're going to sit back and wait for some sort of newish Barack Obama to step forward and lead us all to the promised land, I think we're going to be sitting on our hands for a very long time. This is really growing from the bottom up. And honestly, isn't that the best way?
Totally right, John. And if I think there will be a great candidate. I think we will surface a great candidate, but it's too early.
Yeah.
I mean, that election is 3 years away. What we need now is for us to say we are not having this, and for us to blunt the worst of it, and for us to throw out enough of his fascist enablers in Congress at our first opportunity, right?
Yep.
Because every day it gets worse.
Yes, it does. And one story that I've talked about a little bit, but I wish was getting more attention, we saw Trump go after the law firms, okay? We saw Trump go after the universities. But this personal attempt to somehow criminalize the behavior of Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs, that to me is a whole... They have crossed another line. Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs, for those of you who don't remember, they were in the first Trump administration. Miles Taylor famously wrote the opinion piece that the New York Times carried, the first Edwin they ever carried that didn't have an author, was listed as anonymous.
Yep.
And it was basically, don't worry about, there are those of us within the administration that are working to rein in the worst impulses and soften the worst efforts. And then Chris Krebs, poor Chris Krebs, head of cybersecurity, came out and said, yep, 2020 election, free and fair. We looked over, we were watching, it was free and fair. And Trump said, you're fired. How dare you? How dare you say it was free and fair? And Trump's now trying to get them both somehow brought up on charges. It's terrifying.
Yeah. Yes. They are investigating in search of crimes, just as they're doing now with the governor and the attorney general in New Jersey. They admit there isn't a crime, but they're going to investigate anyway. These are the appalling people who talk about weaponization of government. So all they're doing is proving what we have known. They are liars and thugs. I grew up in Chicago. I've seen mobsters. I'm up close and personal. I know what this is like, and that's what this is. But I want us Americans to just remember that we are capable of being better than this.
Yes, and I think at the grassroots level, people know that. They really do. Unfortunately, the one body that could provide a check on Trump's worst impulses, at least until the midterms come and go, they're scared to death of him. They're scared to death of him. Mike Johnson making a rule change so that the House of Representatives can't take up the Senate measure that was going to say, no, actually, we're taking away your power to put tariffs on Canada. And, Mike Johnson couldn't have that. So he changed the rules so it couldn't come for a vote. I mean, good God.
Yeah, well, he changed the rules in the CR, Joan, which meant that the Senate also voted on that, as did a few Democrats cross over and make it law. So that is really disappointing.
Yeah, and I get a lot of people texting in during my show wanting to know why some of these Democrats are voting the way they are. I have to assume they have good reason, but I find it puzzling myself, Edwin. Any insights?
No, and I don't care. I mean, I want to keep my eye on the adversary who is causing our problems, not some of the people trying to stop him who may make some mistakes while they're trying to stop him. They're on our side, even if they're making some mistakes, even if they're making some big mistakes. They're not the villain who's trying to end American democracy. They're not the villain who's sweeping people off the streets to send to a dungeon in El Salvador. And they're not the capricious mobsters who think they can bully the whole world and have just brought sort of economic chaos and maybe the end of, American economic power forever, because those tax cuts on top of all of this are going to really devastate our ability to pay our debts and everything.
I read a really good article this morning, and it said, because I'm in the world of finance, I'm not very well educated. But, this person was explaining, clearly talking to somebody who doesn't have a finance background, that usually when the stock market goes up, the bond market goes down. They usually sort of are inversely proportional to one another. Right. And when both markets start moving in the same direction, that sends shockwaves through the financial community and through big business. And that's what's happening now. The stock market is going down and the bond market is not coming up. And the article I read this morning that was like sort of finance for idiots, which I really appreciated, basically said, kids, tariffs or no tariffs, this really looks like the beginning of a recession.
Yeah, and Dean Baker is going to be on later and talk a little bit about this, but the bond market is struggling with the concern about whether U.S. credit is still as sound as it was. We had the best credit in the world, and we were the place where people put their money when they were afraid because it was safe. Now, all over the world, people are selling America. They're selling our equities, the price is going down. They're selling our debt, the price is going down. They are, they're not coming here. They just have decided we aren't a safe bet in any way anymore. And it is truly dangerous because it means that we won't be in a position to shape the world in a way that reflects our values. But of course, if our values are what Donald Trump thinks they are, you know what? Then we should not be the ones leading the world.
And you make a really good point about not only is there a lot of uncertainty now, but even if Trump woke up and really tried to fix things over the next week or two, I think that the world is now looking at us differently. They are looking at us as an unstable partner. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. I mean, I was reading one economist that said even if Trump righted the ship right now, by their estimate, it would take 80 years before the rest of the world trusted us again to be who we used to be, or at least who we thought we used to be.
Well, it's dangerous, right? We have a guy in the White House who no one can trust. He has a man leading our Defense Department who, after Signalgate, no soldier will trust. Boy, that's dangerous. He has a woman leading our national intelligence who, after a hearing when she didn't even know what kind of classifications there are for important state secrets, no one in the intelligence services will trust. And his word is clearly not to be trusted. He's the one, after all, who got rid of NAFTA, negotiated a deal with Mexico and Canada. He negotiated it. He signed it. And then famously, just a few weeks ago, he tore it up, walked away, called them villains, and declared economic war on our neighbors. He's not trustable in any way. His administration isn't. So if you see that and you're in, another country, do you want to say, look, what do we think about the United States as a partner? Mm-hmm. Can we have our entire future in the hands of a few swing voters in some state that are fed a steady stream of garbage from OAN and Fox? Mm-hmm. Is that really, are we betting our future on that? And they're saying, no, they're not. And that's on us. That's on you and me and all our neighbors and friends.
What are you saying to people? What advice do you give people if there are folks in their lives who voted for Trump and are now doing the, oh, my God, I didn't think he'd come after me. Oh, my God, I didn't think prices would go up. I thought eggs would be cheaper. I thought inflation would come down. Maybe I made a mistake. When somebody has a person like that in their orbit, what would be your advice to how to interact with them?
Well, first off, the Trump voters I know aren't having that reaction. They're like, oh, he's got a secret plan. It's going to be fine. I mean, they're just that bought in. But the ones who repent, oh my gosh, what do they say? Like the lost lamb cometh home. Like I celebrate. I'm like, welcome to the fight, man. Make them feel comfortable because you know what? We need is vote. We need them to tell other people. This is not a time for I told you so's. This is a time for welcome. We need your help. All hands on deck. Couldn't agree with you more.
I interviewed Amy Parnas, and she's a co-author of the new book out, Fight, and it's the story of the election, what went on behind the scenes in Trump world, what went on behind the scenes in Biden world. And she said, when I interviewed her, that initially Barack Obama very much felt there should be an open convention because he had serious doubts about Kamala's ability to win. Now, he eventually campaigned for her, but, when Biden kind of handed her the crown, it kind of was everyone was in a very difficult place. But on the one hand, the book also says that, yes, Biden agreed to endorse her right away, but that Biden also pretty much told her, you can't deviate. If I'm going to do this for you, you owe me, and you have to basically endorse all of the things I've done, all of my policies. You can't say that on any issue you would take a different tack. I mean, I guess that's politics. You'd know better than me, Edwin.
You know what? Politics is many things, but one of the important ones is building coalitions that win. Anything that you do that says we're going to hand the country over to whom we all agree was the biggest threat to our democracy, maybe ever, is ridiculous. Ridiculous. I mean, in retrospect, Joe should have said from the beginning, this is one term and I'm done.
Well,
but I don't think you know
that.
when old age.
He said
I'm a
wanted
transition.
To be a transition to the next thing.
Well, he wasn't. I mean, I loved some of the things he did as president. I really did. And some of the legislation was remarkable and important. And it showed his expertise as a legislator. But we needed Americans want a president with energy. They want a president who is fighting to get things done in a way they see. And Joe fought in a way most Americans didn't see. Donald Trump is out there, and God knows that's all we see.
Yeah, really. I mean, we had a president who never was very seemingly reluctant to toot his own horn and be on camera. And has there been a day when Trump hasn't been on camera with somebody?
Oh,
I don't think so.
He's jealous of a hurricane if it gets more news than he gets.
Yeah, really. So how long do you think the bromance with Elon Musk is going to last?
That requires me to get into either of their heads, and that is a psychodrama I'm not interested in. I'm really worried about what Elon Musk is doing quite separately from what Trump is doing. I'm worried about, he knows how to use data, and I'm worried about his unfettered access to all of the data of the United States government, including all of its data on all of us. This is data that was never meant to be in private hands. All the taxes you've ever paid, anything that you've ever, all the data from the Social Security file about every job you've ever had, this should not be in his hands. I mean, all the medical claims that anybody in Medicare or Medicaid has ever made, this was never meant to be in private hands. And now they're meddling with the data. They're declaring people who are alive dead in order so that they can be financially shut out of everything in America, so that they are not able to survive here. This is as corrupt and dangerous a thing as is imaginable, and that's Musk, even apart from Trump. So one is awful, two is unthinkable.
Yeah. Welcome to 2025. I'm glad you're in it with me. I'm hanging on to my wonderful circle of friends to maintain my sanity. My doctor a week ago, Edwin, scolded me and said that I needed more self-care. So I'm going to be leaning on you a lot more going forward.
Well, thank you, Joan. And I appreciate, when I have a guest that mysteriously isn't here, that you would show up. And even though you do this every day, and I'm exhausted every Saturday just from my stint, and you do it every day. So the fact that you're willing to come back on and share what you've learned with everybody on Saturday is terrific. Thank you, Joan.
Anytime. Paul tells me you've got a bunch of callers, so I will stop chatting and let you get to them.
All right, Joan. Thank you.
Take care, Edwin. Bye.
Bye. All right. I hope you guys are listening to Joan every weekday, 2 to 5. All right. Nancy.
Hi,
Nancy.
Edwin. How are you?
I'm holding up.
Well, congratulations. You finally realized what I've been screaming about for like 50 years now that I've been voting. And
what?
Believe
that there are two parties?
Yep, I could talk to you about this for the next 3 hours, the whole show. But I know I don't have that time. I'm just going to say this, like I'm always saying, we are still being ruled by an undemocratic two-party system. I'll give them, in the beginning, 1787, whatever it was, we needed that, and we only had the WASPy men voting, And, that was necessary then. The problem is we have not changed a thing in the basic main rules that has grown with us. And here we are in 2025, women and minorities still unequal, no health care, going bankrupt because of health care or college funds, college costs. And, no education. They're dumbing us down for the longest time, and nobody's done anything about it. And here we are. And now all of a sudden they're turning around and saying to us, oh, we got to do something, and you should get out there and vote. Really? Vote for what? Your show and everybody else's show that I listen to, every day I hear points that support my argument, because we started with 3.9 million people in this country. Now we're up to 100 times that, and we're still trying to, put everybody under one tent. No, you can't do that. We're too diversified, too many different religions or non-religions, too many different ethnicities, everything. And so, I'm hoping.
Well, Nancy, are you saying we'd be better if we fractured ourselves so that every group had their own party?
No, I'm talking about having a compromise. You have to compromise, not concede. We have a Senate that isn't democratic.
No, never has been.
We have to work. Right, exactly. And that's one of the problems. The majority will never win and never rule because this system is set up for minority rule. The Montana
actually,
more representation than the people.
I'm more optimistic, as you know, and I actually think there is a governing majority in America. They're not currently activists in either party. I think there is a broad sense of the things we all agree on. And if you look at a lot of polling on a lot of issues, 60, 70% of Americans agree on an enormous amount of things. And, and if we could focus on those.
That proves my point. There's a majority of us out there who want all this stuff that we've been fighting for, and yet why can't we get it? Because one person, what kind of sense does this make? One person in our government can turn around, can stand up and say, nope, I don't agree with that, and stop the wheels of government from ever turning. That's ridiculous.
No, you're talking about filibusters, I think. But it could easily apply to a president, too.
No, not only filibusters. What about Tuberville when he stopped the military stuff? Just by
that's what that was. That's what that was.
Johnson? Mikey Johnson putting that rule up now that, and no one can turn around and stop this. No one can stop this fake president who just, is a piece of inhuman crap. They can't stop him from destroying us. Come on.
Well, no, we have to throw enough people out. As soon as we get control, as soon as they lose, this fascist party loses control of one of the houses of Congress, it'll get stopped.
We should have never had fascism in our government. And
I agree.
I'm hoping that you're right and I'm wrong, but I'm really worried about not having elections anymore. And
Nancy, you're not crazy to worry. They threw out 60,000 votes, at least so far. They have a ruling to throw out 60,000 votes in North Carolina in order to steal an election.
North Carolina, they're not even listening to. They're not obeying the laws. What do you do about that? When he turns around and says, "No, we're not going to listen to you," what are we supposed to do? How do we fight back?
Well, we live through it and throw them out is what we do. And that's what happens all over the world. Yeah. All right, Nancy, I'm going to move on, but thank you as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yep. Paul.
Yes. Hey, Edwin. I hope next Saturday should be the big protest. in remembrance of the words, by the rude bridge that arched the flood, their flag to April's breeze unfurled. Here once the embattled farmer stood and fired the shot heard round the world. April 19th was the Battle of Lexington, the first battle of liberation. April 19th, 1775. And that's kind of where we are. We need to speak up. The lawlessness is, I know, I understand Nancy's frustration, but this wasn't completely, it's not that we don't have democracy. It's the fact that about every so often, Democrats poop the bed, like in 2000, and at the worst times. 2000, it's always a census year, yeah. 2010, no turnout to support Obama. In 2016, couldn't get excited about Hillary. And, of course, in 2024, the same effect, Kamala Harris. And that was really, remember before the handoff of the baton, experts were saying, this is political suicide. And I remember saying in my program, okay, let's all get excited, but you sure as hell better win. And we didn't. So, you can go back and talk about the Biden legacy. Biden was a good president, but he had no forward vector. And the administration did nothing about that in terms of beginning to empower Kamala Harris, be in the position where she ultimately had to be, and we all knew that. So she's running as we're talking about in August of 2024, saying, she's got to get out and let people know who she is. Well, the American people sure as hell should have known who she was, at least very familiar with her for the last 2 years. But the Democrats did not play that strategy, did they?
Well, Joe and Barack both had strengths as presidents, but they both failed to build an enduring coalition. And in both cases, the Trump phenomena overwhelmed what they had built, and that's a very tough thing to swallow. But it's they didn't do it, and they should have left us vulnerable to this madness. And is it really related to the fact that half of the U.S. adults read at the 7th grade level or below, or that 19% of us don't really read at all? I'm using reading here, I suppose, as a proxy for critical thinking, and it's overstates critical thinking, but it's a lot of people who don't take the time to look at the data and think about it in their own way. And many Americans are just too busy worried about other things. So it's I think Trump voters, didn't pay much attention, and they didn't. I think they're shocked right now, some of them. We'll see, won't we?
Well, I can't understand the case in North Carolina. As far as I know, a vote cast is a vote cast. You can't throw votes away. Once they're cast, that's it. Now, there may have been people, even if there were people who voted who shouldn't have, that's for the state to deal with afterwards. That's not, you don't say, we don't do that. We don't do that.
This case is, Paul, just let me interrupt for 1 second. The case in North Carolina is not alleging that anybody committed vote fraud. It is not about whether somebody voted who shouldn't. It's about whether the rules should have been changed. And they're asking that question after the election. So it's not even about vote fraud. It's just about stealing an election.
Right. It's like I said, any question after the fact, after a vote is cast, is simply undemocratic. I can't see how any court can uphold that decision.
Appellate court in the state did.
Yeah. Well, that tells you about North Carolina.
Well, I'm hoping their Supreme Court will do the right thing. I think it's 50-50 bet at best, but I'm still hoping. And then there's still a federal case that's related to it, so we'll see. Thank you for calling and being part of this unscheduled moment of calls. I appreciate it. I do.
Okay.
Right. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Steve, you're next.
Yes, we actually stole my thunder on a few points, and I think you're absolutely right. I mean, this doesn't happen absent the fact that Americans simply aren't engaged, aren't interested, and they lazily turn to places like Newsmax and Fox and so forth. And, of course, those are set in a staged fashion so that they look like Walter Cronkite did 50 years ago, so that you get the impression that Sean Hannity is giving you the news or analysis when in reality he's a mouthpiece for the Trump administration and the Republican Party. And that, unfortunately, is where we are. That Americans have turned away from credible outlets and honest analysis, and this is where they're getting their information from. On Election Day in 2024, apparently about half of Americans thought we were in a recession, despite being in a robust economy. Why? Because they were getting their information about what was going on in the economy from those kinds of sources. And that's the big battle. That's what Tom Nichols talks about in The Death of Expertise. Great book. I suggest everyone read it. We've got to battle this, at its foundational level. But, I don't know how we do that. I don't know how we get people to understand what is credible versus what is not a credible news outlet.
Well, the whole media ecosystem is changing. For the first time now, just recently, streaming overtook cable. So that, there's a whole different world out there. And Fox is going to be less of a powerhouse, but other streaming services will pick up their slack. Americans have to decide for themselves, and I think they will after seeing this complete train wreck of an administration and the damage it's done to everything we care about. I think people will say, God, we've been lied to and lied to and lied to. But that means somebody else has to step in. And it's why I, Steve, spend so much time with States Newsroom and Courier Newsroom and help, credible, independent, different kinds of news organizations find their way and hopefully build the audience for the second half of this century that will be at least exposed to something truer.
Oh, absolutely. And it's those kinds of efforts that are going to hopefully salvage this for us. And it's not enough that we're on the right side. We have to get enough Republicans, enough of those people who we disagree with on a lot of issues to recognize that this is not in the interest of anyone. What this administration is doing is an existential threat to this country. Your country, my country, we can go back to arguing what we've been arguing for decades or generations. But this is not George Bush's Republican Party. It's not Mitt Romney's Republican Party. I can live with that. If Mitt Romney had won the election, okay, I could live with that. I wouldn't be happy because I'm not a fan of his policies, but I wouldn't wake up every morning wondering what disaster is going to befell this country because he's made some decisions, and I'm going to anticipate that the market's going to drop 2,000 points, which is going to lead to layoffs and the breaking of trade agreements and a long-term economic impact. So, yes, we've got to get them to understand they made a mistake. And I'm not trying to rub anybody's nose in it. Everyone makes mistakes. But we told you this was going to happen. As Maya Angelou says, when someone tells you who they are, believe them. There was no excuse the second time around.
Nope. But we did it. We put them there. And, Steve, it's not just that they are dangerous and doing terrible things. Also, so many of them are just incompetent. And they're there just because they flatter the boss, but they don't know what they're doing. And so the things that they want government to do are terrible. But the things that government, this may be a very big silver lining. Americans are learning after years of saying government is the problem, government stinks. Americans are learning that government isn't really terrible. That in fact, hardworking people show up every day to do public service and have done some amazing things, like who's going to get on a cruise ship now that the U.S. government, which was, basically the board of health for cruise ships out in the ocean everywhere, is no longer doing that job. And so we're going to have all kinds of viruses and illnesses, right? But we're going to learn that keeping airplanes in the air was an important job of government. Yeah.
Absolutely. We take for granted the things that don't happen. The fact that you can eat today and know you're not going to be killed from the food that you're eating. You can take medication and it's not going to kill you. You can get on an airplane and it's not going to kill you. Why? Because somebody's overseeing all of this. It's not magically happening. Because we had a system in this country in the 19th century in which people could sell you anything, call it a drug, and it would kill you because there were no such regulations. But, again, it's the things that aren't happening to us, protect us, that we take for granted, and then want to blame government and say, this is a waste. It is not a waste.
No, well, that's why I say that's a silver lining here. I think people are waking up to the fact that government may not be the evil that they've always said it was, and that maybe they've said that because they don't want to help anyone. They want to take everything. And whether that's, the corporate titans or political mobsters like the guy in the White House. Anyway, Steve, thank you for calling. I really appreciate it. I know there's still others who have called in, and I appreciate this. And maybe I'll do calls earlier in the show another time because you guys seem to like that, and there are a lot of good calls. But if you're on the list, I'm going to do calls again, in the last half hour. So 3:30. Don't go away. Call me back then because I have a couple other guests I need to get in between now and then, and I now need to take a break for the news. When we come back, I'm sure that the other guests will be here. Dave Roberts is going to join me for a talk about this administration and the environment. Stay tuned.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, everybody, welcome back. David Roberts, you know him. He's joined me a lot, thank goodness. He writes about the environment and policy and the impact of environmental change on the economy and society. He has just an absolutely fabulous podcast and newsletter called Volts. And if you care at all about these issues, it's just great. David, welcome.
Hello, happy to be here.
So I have so many things I want to talk to you about, but you remember we were talking before the election about whether or not these guys would give us data we could trust after the election. And yes. Right? And I hear that they have ordered the destruction of databases across the government, particularly when it comes to anything related to, women or black people. A library in one state just got rid of an entire database of books by minority authors. We don't know why we would have that. If anybody wants to find out, do it the hard way. And now I just listened to the news, and I know you listened to the news, and you heard them talk about the spread of measles. I don't know anymore whether we're going to know about the spread of measles.
Well, that is the point, and this is one of those areas where if you go back a ways and listen to the sort of most hysterical warnings from the left. They weren't hysterical enough. They were, they were all absolutely correct. And that's, this is, and one of the things people say generally about autocrats is the first thing they do when they come in is go after media, go after the information environment. That's the basis of everything else. And the key is to get you and to get the polity in a state where they don't know anything or they don't trust anyone. They don't trust any information they see. They don't know what's real. They don't know what's true. And so they turn to the big strong man for protection. That's just this is just like the least original observation on the planet. It's been true of every autocrat in the modern age, absolutely predictable and absolutely going down as predicted. And it's funny, he's talking about government efficiency, quote unquote, but he's chopping stuff that saves us money. He's chopping stuff that is maintained by third parties that doesn't even cost the U.S. Treasury any money. You know what I mean? Nothing, you can't make any sense of what he's doing. if you look at it through the lens of efficiency. He's very
it's not efficient. How expensive is it to
deliberately
send?
Targeting knowledge-producing institutions. Like those are the first ones to go.
Yeah. And this lawless tyrant in the executive branch seems to think he can force the country to continue to burn coal forever. Like, seriously, David, what's that about?
Well, I never know. You know, it's always hard to, when these people talk, like my sense that I get from the MAGA people generally, and it's Trump is, it's the truest of Trump of all, is that they kind of view politics as a game of move and counter move online. You're online jousting, trying to own the other side, trying to make good rhetorical points, trying to troll the other guy. I don't get any sense that they understand on a deep level that beyond this online fight that they're engaged in, there's a world with institutions and real people and real things happening. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just don't get the sense that they have a good sense that their words and actions are connected to things in the real world. So when Trump says, I'm going to bring back coal, how are we to interpret that? Like, is that meant to be a prediction about affairs, about things in the actual world? I don't know that it is. I think you should just read it as a sort of expression of solidarity with a certain class of his supporters. It's just a way of saying to a certain class of his supporters, I see you and I value you. And the even more surreal part of this is it's unclear if you're a laid off coal miner or, like a poor person in Appalachia, if they are taking it seriously as a statement about the world. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't even know if the people hearing this are interpreting it as a statement about the real world versus just, I see you people. I care about you. You're on my team. We're on the same team. I think that's literally like 90% of what he says is just that. It's just, I'm expressing, here's who's in my team. And here's who's outside it. Here's who's under my protection. Here's who's not. It's just mob boss. It's just mob boss mentality. Like, you're on the inside, you're on the outside. So I don't think we should worry ourselves talking about the actual facts of coal, in America. Like, of course he's not going to revive it. Of course it's dead regardless. Of course we all know that. But here we are reciting statistics, but they don't care about that. You know what I mean? They don't care about the truth of the question. It feels slightly ridiculous taking it seriously and talking about it as though it's a serious thing. I just don't think
he'll spend money on it.
I don't think they mean it seriously.
Well, he'll spend money on it. I mean, talking about efficiency, he'll try and spend money for a while. But the coal is so inefficient. And so, I mean, no matter what he does, he doesn't have the power.
Yeah, I'll just say this about coal. The only way there's ever going to be a new coal power plant built in the United States is if the government funds it top to bottom, front to back, start to finish. That's it. Yeah. You cannot persuade a private party, no matter their ideology, to invest money in that. It's just an obvious, very transparently obvious money loser. So, I mean, maybe who knows, Trump can distort things and warp things to the point that the money that the government actually does spend the billions of dollars to fund a coal plant. But I don't anticipate that. I don't see him doing that. So I would just say we're never going to have a new coal plant in the U.S., period.
I think that's right. I mean, David, the things that people don't really know, and let's just take a minute on the economics of energy. I mean, you know this. The world has moved on. The world really has moved on, and some of this is due to other administrations have helped seed this. Other countries have helped seed it. But the technology of energy is not what it used to be. And no matter what these terrible people do, I don't see fossil fuels being the dominant form of energy 100 years from now. I just don't see it.
I mean, the way to understand coal was it used to be cheap, and I put air quotes around cheap. The only reason it was cheap to begin with is that we purposefully did not price the environmental damages into the market. That we let the industry externalize those damages, including climate change, but many, many others, mercury, particulates, on and on. And I mean, coal's just the absolute dirtiest, number one dirtiest of anything. You know, it's just like climate enemy number one. It was cheap as long as we ignored that stuff. But when other competitors came along and started to compete on price, suddenly then you don't really have the same impetus to ignore the externalities. You know what I mean? So then you start pricing those in, and pretty soon, once coal is paying its actual cost, including all those environmental damages, it's just wildly inexpensive, wildly more expensive than gas, more expensive than nuclear at this point, like way more expensive than wind or solar. I mean, it's just like the race was over a decade ago. It's just like the news is taking a while to trickle out.
And I just think all of these extractive technology sources of energy, they just turn out to be more expensive, even if you don't count the externalities, just because you just keep having to drill for the source of power every day, because once you use it, it's gone. And that's just not true of sunlight or wind.
And it's interesting to think about this in the context of tariffs too, because everybody's talking about tariffs now, and one of the discussions is what they're going to do to the energy industry. And it's true, they're putting tariffs on solar panels and batteries. But the thing is, like, you pay a tariff on a battery once, right? You build a fossil fuel power plant, you're paying tariffs on that imported fuel every single day. Right. So the tariffs are intrinsically much more difficult for, power plants that require fuel. I mean, people have not really processed solar power is if you put the materials in the right form, you just lay it on the ground and it produces money. Like, you don't have to do anything to it. You don't have to mine anything. There are literally no moving parts. You just lay it on the ground and it will crank out money for you for the rest of its 30-year life. It's a miracle. And that's slowly the world, I mean, not slowly, rapidly the world is catching on to that.
I think one of the big limiting factors for things like solar, at least, and wind is energy storage, just batteries, right? Because you got to be able to use the power when it's dark or when the wind isn't blowing. And these geniuses in the White House canceled 300 or more Inflation Reduction Act grants, not to universities here, but with private companies that were developing new energy storage technology.
Well,
but seriously, I don't think they can stop that either.
Yeah, let's not grant them. I mean, this is the weird thing about politics in our time is, like, there is a crazy person in the White House saying things, but we don't have to accept, you know what I mean? Like, the analogy I keep thinking about over and over and over again is if anybody remembers the Office, the show, the sitcom Office, remember when they told Michael he had to declare bankruptcy and he just says, "I declare bankruptcy." He just declares it. It's like, that's not how it works. And it's the same with Trump. Like, you can't just say that a democratically passed law is not in force anymore. You can't, you can't do that. So, like, the IRA rebates are in effect until Congress passes a law saying otherwise. Like, that's how U.S. government works. So, you know what I mean? He hasn't cut off IRA subsidies. He can't do that. I mean, he's trying to jam it up at the payment level, sort of bypass the whole democratic process, and that will work itself out in court, and who knows how the court cases will pan out. But, like, he hasn't stopped the IRA subsidies. He can't. He's the president. He's not a dictator. So that's just worth saying. But yes, like, one of the ironies going on right now is one of the purported justifications for the tariffs is he's trying to – the idea is if you put these punishing tariffs on imported goods, then people will want to manufacture them in the U.S., right? The whole idea is to spur a domestic manufacturing industry. The irony is that was Biden's whole deal. That's the whole impetus behind the Inflation Reduction Act. That is literally the whole thinking. That is what the IRA subsidies are meant to do. And they were doing it like there were dozens of announced battery and electric vehicle and et cetera manufacturing facilities in various stages of planning. Lots of those are canceling now because of just the volatility, just because no one knows what's going on. So Trump is very actively and directly killing a nascent domestic manufacturing industry, the exact opposite of what he claims to be doing. And that was because that manufacturing industry is mostly going to be EVs and batteries and solar. Like clean tech is the future. That's the 21st century. That's the competitive global industry of the 21st century. That's what China is kicking our ass on right now, and we're trying desperately to catch up. But that's it. So you can't, like, he wants, you know, he has these cliches flying around in his head of like tough guys in steel plants and, you know, banging hammers. And I don't know what he imagines in his head, what kind of manufacturing facilities he's imagining. But like, if you want a robust manufacturing industry, domestic manufacturing in the U.S., that's what's booming. That's what you need. And he's killing that right now, including a lot of, as you say, battery factories. Yeah,
it's crazy. I mean, and maybe China has been serious about this. We say they're serious about it because they wanted to leapfrog us because we were ahead, but they don't have oil, and they don't have it in, you know, in the United States.
This is one of the background facts that people need to understand about energy, which colors all of the coming decades. There are a handful of countries that produce and export oil and gas, and then there are dozens and dozens of countries that don't, that just import them. And so those producing countries are very invested in slowing climate action and trying to thwart clean energy and et cetera to keep fossil fuels.
And we're one of them.
And we're one of them, but we're
biggest one,
vastly outnumbered by the importing nations that want to accelerate this, most notably China. And also China, like the reason we were able to get off coal in the U.S., the reason that our emissions have been declining is that we're mostly switching from coal to gas. We have a lot of cheap domestic gas. China doesn't have that either. So China is being forced to jump from coal straight to solar, batteries, nuclear, clean energy, et cetera. So they, in a sense, have a harder task, but they've been at it longer and they're way ahead of us. They are the fastest electrifying country in the world. And I just wish that all these xenophobic fear of China is basically like the currency these days in politics. Like if you can somehow tie your pet issue to China's xenophobia, you boost its chances of getting attention and passing. But I wish all these like people who are so scared of China would look and say like, why do you think China is doing this? Like, why do you think China is putting its extraordinary resources towards transitioning this giant economy from coal and oil to clean energy? Why do you think they're doing that? You know what I mean? And are we just going to stand like this is Trump's idea is, and I would say generally, it's not just Trump. We've talked about this before. There's a global reactionary, thing happening, backlash happening. And I think the reactionaries in the U.S. especially say, okay, well, as fossil fuels get scarcer, we're going to be the last ones standing. We're going to be the last ones selling fossil fuels. You know what I mean? Like we're going to dominate fossil fuels until they're gone. But it's just it's utterly futile. It's a matter of geopolitics. It's a matter of economics. I mean, we're very
it's like
close.
Saying America's the horse and buggy company. And that's just we're tying our future to it.
We're going to sell the last horse and buggy. And the thing about that strategy is the last horse and buggy always arrives faster than you think it's going to, right? Like people who say that are always like, oh, we got like a 10, 20-year runway. No, we don't. One of the things to watch for in the next couple of years, and we are just teetering on the verge of China's oil demand has been just rising steadily. You know, I mean, China's just been growing throughout the whole 21st century. So everything's been rising. Like I just did a pod on this think tank does a global electricity.
I listened to it.
And they're just like, here's where people are generating electricity, and here's what's been added since last year, all that kind of stuff. And China has added the most coal. They've added the most wind, the most solar, and the most batteries, and the most EVs. Basically, like China is the most of everything. And they're racing away. And so we're just on the verge of Chinese oil demand plateauing, peaking, basically, because of EVs. Like EVs are the main thing that's going to cause that to happen in China. Mm-hmm. And then like once oil demand starts going down in China, like this is something that if you talk to people in business, they will tell you that like even if they're not very different in absolute numbers, industry that's growing is very different than an industry that's shrinking. Do you know what I mean? So like,
sure, you can't get investment. You can't do anything. It goes away.
You cross that peak. Yep. You cross that peak and you're headed down, even if it's a very slow decline. Even if there's a bumpy plateau for a while, once growth stops, all of a sudden investors look at you very differently. An industry that is in structural sort of stasis and decline, very different than an industry that's growing. And we are, I would say, within 2-3 years of China's oil demand peaking and then global oil demand peaking. And then I think like everything's going to happen faster than people think it's going to happen. So like the U.S. strategy right now is just, I mean, it hardly even needs saying, just wildly counterproductive.
Inappropriate. There is one thing
any national goal you could name, like any goal. They're not serving any goal well.
They're serving the goal of a handful of very wealthy people. I wanted to ask you about something. I've been getting things from the nuclear industry and the American nuclear industry, frankly, that says that they're on the verge of doing some remarkable things. And I don't think that's something you and I have talked about, but there are a whole bunch of companies, including one that Bill Gates owns, that think they're on the verge of safe, smaller, cost-effective nuclear energy. Is that right?
Yeah, I will say I have never bothered to become any kind of expert on nuclear energy, on the different forms of it, the different kind of plants you can build, et cetera, because I've basically been operating with a basic heuristic. Because from the time I started doing this in the early 2000s, every year, without fail, there are articles saying the nuclear industry is on the verge, right on the verge of a renaissance. The renaissance is real this time. We can taste it. It's so close. Everybody's excited, blah, blah, blah. Endless, on and on and on and on the verge, on the verge, on the verge. We've been on the verge now for at least 20 years, as long as I've been tracking that, and we're still on the verge. So my heuristic is just like, build a plant. Like I refuse to get excited about this anymore. You know what I mean? And the hype is back. The hype about SMRs is back. All these guys who are building data centers are like, oh, we're going to build nuclear plants to fuel them. I'm like, all right, man, that like the battlefield is littered with the corpses of people who came before you thinking they were going to do that. But maybe you can do it. Maybe you have some magic tech sauce that can break through all these barriers that defeated everybody else, and you can actually build a nuclear plant in the U.S. Go for it. Once it's built and it's producing power, I will be at the head of the line celebrating it. I will podcast about it. I will go and throw a bottle of champagne at it, whatever. But like until then, I just refuse to get caught up in another hype cycle. Like it's just the barriers to nuclear in the U.S. are very well understood. They're very old. No one's for all the talk and hype, no one's figured out a way around them. No private investor wants to do this. They built one in Georgia. You might remember Vodal, which just finally came online last year. However, tens of billions of dollars over budget and all that. And they had an agreement with the utility that all that overage, all that cost went straight to utility ratepayers in Georgia. So Georgia ratepayers are seeing their rates skyrocket to pay for this wildly over budget nuclear plant. And the guy who runs the Georgia PUC, the
Public
Utility Regulatory Committee, has said publicly, repeatedly, over and over again, we will never do this again unless the federal government comes to us and says, we promise we will pay any cost overage. If this goes over budget, we will pay it, not your ratepayers. And he's like, until they come and sign on that bottom line, no one's going to do this again. So maybe they can make, I've been hearing the hype about SMRs, small modular reactors. The whole idea with small modular reactors is if you can standardize the parts and build them in factories, that's how you bring costs down, basically. Mm-hmm. It's like regularizing things, modularizing things, make it so you build it in a factory instead of on site. And that way you can repeat it and learn from it. That's the idea. But people have been talking about that for over a decade now. Hype. And the plants that have actually come online into service that go under that name are, as Jigar Shah said on my podcast, neither small nor modular nor cheap. So so I'm I don't have that crusty old environmental opposition to nuclear power based on the waste or whatever, all that kind of stuff. I don't have any of that stuff. I don't have any, I'm fine with nuclear power. It's a hell of a lot safer than coal. As long as there's a single coal plant running on the planet, you have no, you know what I mean? You shouldn't be complaining about nuclear. Get rid of the coal, then we'll talk. But they just are expensive. They're more expensive to build. Some countries have figured out how to build them sort of reasonably. I just did a pod on Finland last week. Mm-hmm. Finland has 5 nuclear reactors that provide about 40% of their power, and it seems to be working fine. Everybody's fine with it, and that's fine. But we have all these regulations that need clearing. We have all these financing mechanisms that need to be worked out. We got to figure out who's going to pay, who's the backstop, and all of the anywhere where nuclear works, it works because the government comes in and basically vouchsafes it, backstops it, and so it's not going to happen in the U.S. unless socialism. I mean, this is what's funny. I talked with Representative Sean Casten of Illinois on the pod a couple of weeks ago, and he's like, it's so funny. All these guys, all these Republicans, are obsessed with the most socialist form of energy production. Nowhere does nuclear exist unless there is a state funding and backing it. So maybe, maybe Trump is, maybe the force of his willpower is such that he can bend the government to his will, and we will spend billions of dollars of public money building another nuclear plant. Maybe so, but I
got some old ones around here in Chicago.
I mean, the idea of extending the life of existing nuclear plants, that's a fantastic idea. Let's do that all we can. And if Microsoft wants to pay to bring 3 Mile Island back into service, it's ludicrous, but go ahead, fire up those old nuclear plants. But building a new one, it's just, I just am skeptical, and I'm going to be skeptical
until it happens.
No matter how many press releases I get, until I see one producing electrons,
Right. But at any rate, you're confident, and I am too, that the era of fossil fuels is reaching its denouement, and a new energy order is coming, and that the United States is firmly committed to screwing it up and losing out.
Yes, the way I put it is the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy is underway and inevitable. The end point is inevitable. What we have our hands on are the timing, how fast it happens, and the equity, how fairly it unfolds. We can affect those through policy, but we can't stop it through policy. Trump's not going to stop it. Like, this is, I mean, one of the things we're sort of learning to our dismay, I think a lot of Americans are learning to our dismay, is that, like, America is not really like the big man on campus anymore. You know what I mean? Like, in a sense, like, who cares what we do? Like, what China and India and like Vietnam and those countries, those rising Southeast Asian countries, what they do matters much more for climate, for global economics, for like what kind of power, you know what I mean? Like, for everything, those are where the real significant decisions are being made. Like, in a sense, like, the U.S. is, not going to become a backwater. We're too big and too rich for that, but we don't sort of set the stakes anymore. So, like, we could opt out of the clean energy transition and cling to fossil fuels, but we can't stop them from being cheap, and we can't stop people operating in a free market from purchasing them unless we get a lot more dictatorial than we are now. You know what I mean? And so
there are limits to the mob boss behavior.
I know. There's only like a mob boss, especially in a federal system like ours,
or a global system. He's trying to be the mob boss to the world, and it's not working out so well for him.
Yes. And I think, like, we were in the process of the rest of the world sort of like starting to work around us, and he's just like radically accelerated that process. And that's going to be true for the clean energy transition too. Like, China's building all these super high quality, cheap EVs and solar panels and batteries, and we're tariffing the crap out of them. So we're not getting any of the benefit of those cheap things. But like, Vietnam is, Pakistan is. I just did a pod on Pakistan a couple of weeks ago. Like, Pakistan has gone from 0 on solar to like 40% of its power coming from solar in a matter of like 3-4 years, just because China is producing this massive surplus of super cheap solar panels. And Pakistan is like, yes, please, we'll buy all the cheap solar panels you want. We're not going to put tariffs on them. And so we're watching developing nations do this leapfrogging that we've been talking about for decades. You know what I mean? They're jumping past fossil fuel infrastructure.
It's not us. I know.
We could be. Yeah. I mean, in some sense, we are. Some states are still doing stuff, but like, we could be doing so much more. Like, we have the money and the research. And the funny thing is, like, the advantage we have in the clean energy transition is not our sheer size. Like, in the end, even cumulative U.S. greenhouse gas emissions are not the deciding factor in climate change. You know what I mean? Like, even on the most big picture possible scale, our size is not what matters. What matters is our intelligence, our research facilities, our universities, our vibrant markets, our vibrant innovation, and that is precisely what Trump is stomping all over right now, is our main advantage in these global races, which is our smarts and our cleverness and our innovation and our institutions that we've built around them. He's very directly trying to destroy our research centers, our science centers. I mean, he's going after precisely what our advantage is and trying to make us into a big, dumb fossil fuel. You know what I mean? Like, he's trying to make us dumb and like ugly, and it's so perverse. I don't even know how to put words on it.
But that's got to be the last word, because we've run out of time. David, thank you as always. It's fascinating and interesting to talk.
Thanks, Edwin. Sorry if I ramble on. All this is
it's great. Listen, everybody,
as you can imagine.
Go check out Dave's podcast, Volts. It's just really terrific.
Thank you so much, Edwin.
You bet. Talk soon. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, Michael Tomasky of the New Republic is joining us.
You're listening to The Big Picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
All right, everybody. I'm thrilled to be joined again by Michael Tomasky. He is, of course, author, editor, journalist. He leads the New Republic, and he's leading it into a new era of essential writing about our democracy. Michael, welcome back.
Thank
Thank you, sir. Nice to be with you.
I just finished a really great conversation with a talented environmental reporter, David Roberts, and he made this convincing case that the transition from fossil fuels is unstoppable, largely because China and a lot of big countries, but China in particular, just doesn't have any fossil fuels. So they're not willing to be buying them from anybody forever. They're going to figure out how to stop it. And he made the case that Trump's behavior as mob boss to the world, do it my way or we're going to wreck your economy, it is destined to fail because you know what? He doesn't have the power, and the rest of the world is going to circle the wagons.
We're going to find out soon enough. I know David, by the way. He's a terrific reporter and also a very funny guy.
Very.
Yeah, he really is. Anyway, what can we say about what we've been witnessing these last few days? It's just been unbelievable. And now I just clicked on the Washington Post website before you called me, before my phone rang, and now suddenly phones and other electronics are exempt from the tariffs. So he's backing down again. So that shows China's pressure. That shows the pressure of American multinational companies that manufacture things in China. But it completely undercuts what is the supposed, or one of the supposed points of these tariffs, which is to reshore that kind of manufacturing. He wants phones and electronics made in America, he says, but if he's going to exempt them, that's not going to happen. I mean, it's a mess, But
Chinese laptops. Sorry. Now, based on what you just told me, Chinese laptops are going to have lower tariffs than, say, European cars. This isn't a steady leader calibrating his moves for some policy, and it looks like an amateur playing whack-a-mole with the global economy just because he likes holding the hammer.
Yeah, well, mere mortals like you and I, Edwin, we do not understand the art of the deal.
Neither does he. Neither does he. Oh my gosh! You wrote a piece about what has long been my least favorite among his team, Stephen Miller.
Yeah.
You want to tell everybody about this charming gentleman?
Well, he's I'm sure your listeners know he's in charge of the assault on immigrants and there's another headline in the Washington Post: Trump officials have a private goal to deport at least 1 million immigrants in 2025. That's Miller. He's the driving force behind that, and a guy named Tom Homan, but mostly Miller. And he's a very malevolent character and he's a very reactionary, extremely reactionary character in his politics. Anyway, what I wrote about this week was the way these people lined up and said these insanely sycophantic things this week as Trump was making an idiot of himself on the global stage and trying to wreck the global economy. The joke I just made a couple minutes ago, you and I don't understand the art of the deal, that's something that Caroline Leavitt, the White House press secretary, actually said to White House reporters on Thursday.
She's a piece of work, too.
Yeah, oh, my God. There were several others, but the worst was a tweet by Miller that was words to the effect, what you have just witnessed is the most amazing piece of master strategy by an American president in history. I might not have that exactly right, but that was the sum and substance of it. He definitely said by any American president in history. It's just so. Yeah, the point is, but this is what totalitarian thinking is like, Edwin. As you know, the worse the crime, the bigger the lie.
Yeah, it's totalitarian something. I don't think it passes for thinking, but yeah,
right.
It's really madness, and you have. Whether it's Trump using executive orders as sort of executive branch bills of attainder. I mean, things that the Constitution says the legislature can't do, but the executive branch apparently can go after individuals. Just say, there is no crime, but I'm going after you anyway. And he's done it with two of his ex-staff, and in New Jersey, that grand legal scholar who's now their U.S. attorney, Alina Habab, is going after the governor.
Yeah.
And just like in search of a crime.
This executive order about Miles Taylor and Christopher Krebs might be the most shocking single thing he's done since January 20th, which is a big, big statement.
Big thing to say.
So, it might not be, because there are a lot of contenders, but it might well be the single most shocking thing. It is very close, as you said, to a bill of attainder, which is declaring an individual guilty preemptively, essentially, and it's forbidden in the Constitution because it's something that the King of England used to be able to do because he was the king, and it's expressly forbidden in the Constitution. He did not declare officially Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs guilty. They're walking about free. But, he essentially ordered the Justice Department to investigate them for disagreeing with him, for political activism that he didn't like. He says they committed crimes. He says Miles Taylor, whom I know, who's a very courageous and a nice guy, but a very more importantly, a very courageous person. Trump says he's a traitor. It's an outrageous thing for a president to say about somebody before there's even been any evidence presented in a court of law, let alone a verdict. But it's really shocking that he can do this, yes, to American citizens. None of these other people so far are American citizens. So,
that we know. Right.
Yeah, that we know of. Right. Yeah. But now this starts on American citizens, and that's really, not that the other lives aren't to be valued and that they don't have rights. Of course they do. But there's just something different about going after citizens.
Well, right, because the laws are different, and the rule of law is what we're trying to protect. Sure. And so he's saying, as Stalin's security chief Beria said, "Show me the man, I'll show you the crime." Right? If you got a guy you want to be sent away somewhere, just tell me, and I'll figure out a crime I can pin on him. Enormously dangerous.
And it's not, this is not the last of that sort of thing. And I'm just waiting for some hammer to drop on journalists. I don't think I'm important enough, but who knows?
Well, it's already.
Who knows?
I mean, the journalism organizations that are part of larger companies have already felt it. So if you want to sell rockets to the government, you're screwed if you don't toe the line. Hence, the Washington Post changes its way of thinking. If you're thinking of merging with some other company, like some of the big networks, some of the, the these news companies are, after all, part of big media companies. The threats are real, and they're backing off. So it's independent journalism like yours that is the most important and the most trustworthy now.
Well, we're trying, but there are a lot of people who are trying. There are a lot of people doing very courageous work, and but it's just I've had conversations in recent weeks that I just never thought I'd have as a citizen of the United States. Friends who are citizens thinking of traveling abroad and wondering whether they should, whether they'll have trouble getting back.
I've had those same conversations.
Yep.
Do I have to have a printed boarding pass because I can't risk giving him my phone?
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And why? Because they've written some stuff that some zealous ICE agent might not like. We weren't supposed to have to think about this sort of thing in this country, but I guess now we do.
Well, Michael, a few weeks ago, I told the listeners that I thought we were no longer living in a democracy, and I have a long set of reasons for that. I don't think our democracy is dead, but I think these guys have made it dormant, and I think we have to fight to win it back. But the things that we are seeing every day are not things you see in a democracy, and not things you see when the rule of law holds. There's no way to square that anymore.
No. No, there's not. And, it's not as if we're going to go to bed one night and wake up the next morning and it's suddenly a 100% dictatorship. That's obviously not how things work.
Right.
Things get chipped away at, and democracies disappear, and they reappear. And that we've seen that happen in Chile and Argentina and other
recently.
And Poland, and other places.
Yeah.
No, it's not dead, but, I'm just waiting for Freedom House. Freedom House has 3 categories, right? Free, partly free, and not free. And so if you go to freedomhouse.org and you type in Hungary or you type in Lesotho or any place, any country in the world, it will rate those countries as free, partly free, or not free in, I think it's 3 categories or 4.
Yep.
So I'm just waiting for the day when the United States is partly free in one category, and just what a shocking and sickening thing that's going to be.
Yeah, the Economist Intelligence Unit also does a global democracy study. I think theirs is the one that's used by UNESCO, and the last one they did was before our election, and they said there could be real trouble ahead. So I agree with that. You're absolutely right. The world is going to look at us and go, yeah, you know what? They're a quasi-democracy. I mean, I think about what this judicial election, the Supreme Court election in North Carolina, where the Republicans refused to say they lost, even though they lost recounts. They're not alleging any vote fraud, but they're saying, oh, that election was held with rules that we don't like, so let's just change the rules after the fact and throw out 60,000 votes.
Yeah.
And they got a court to agree with them.
Yeah. And again, that's not Trump. I mean, that's just the Republican Party. So one could say that Trump has, accelerated things or something. But this sort of thing went on in the Republican Party even before Trump. You'll remember in Wisconsin when Walker was leaving and Evers was coming in, how in the lame duck session the Republicans did all those things to minimize the governor's powers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they're a fascist party, and I don't know, Michael. I have this fantasy that when we finally overcome this moment, we will have the courage to invoke the 14th Amendment properly with an act from Congress, unseat everybody who was involved in this insurrection, vote on real reforms to campaign finance, get rid of the hangover from Citizens United, and protect the vote before we let these guys back in, because that's what happened after the Civil War. And while we're at it, I'm going to sign up and argue that we should have a museum to American fascism, and the place we should do it is Mar-a-Lago, and we should just take it by eminent domain and do it there. And I mean, if we don't have the courage to do that kind of stuff and tell America that we repudiate this history, not just we can look the other way because we dodged a bullet. I think we affirmatively have to repudiate it.
Yeah, as Germany did in many respects. After 1945,
Bravely.
If you go to Hitler's birthplace, I've never been there personally, but I've read about it and seen the pictures. His birthplace in that little village in Austria, the building still stands, but there's a monument outside to the victims of fascism. So, you're talking about something like that. I'm all for it.
Yeah, I just think we need to. I don't think we can reconcile with each other if we do not repudiate this hate.
Yeah, well, it's going to take that's going to take a party that I'm not sure the Democratic Party quite is right now.
No, I agree with you. And I will work to make it so. But yes, I agree with you. Let's talk about something else, though. That while they're in charge, they're also just shockingly dangerously incompetent. And what are they doing to public health? I mean, I should say what they're doing, what Kennedy is doing feels differently motivated than what they're doing to science and research. But in both cases, the outcome's the same.
Yeah. I don't know what Kennedy's up to. I mean, he's dangerous, of course, because he has these crazy ideas. But he's dangerous. He's not dangerous in quite the same malevolent way, you know. But who knows? It amounts to the same thing. I mean, people are dying of measles, you know, and that hasn't happened in the United States of America in 50 years. And who knows what he's got up his sleeve. But yeah, they don't even care about the concept of public health, and you know, Donald Trump doesn't. I mean, there was a study in the fall of 2019 done by Johns Hopkins University that rated literally every country in the world in terms of its preparedness for a global pandemic. Good timing, right? Fall of 2019.
Yeah.
You know where the United States rated?
I'm afraid to ask.
No, first. Well, it's a horrible answer, but we were number one. Johns Hopkins said we have the public health infrastructure in place to survive a pandemic better than any other country in the world. And look at what happened. You know, 1 million people died, up to 400,000 unnecessarily because of Trump's inaction, according to some studies I read. So, no, that public health is not even a concept that registers to Republicans.
I mean, you know, you would think that their religious base would notice that the man is bedeviled by plagues. You know, right? It should matter. I mean, and it affects all of us. And I'm not, you know, measles is terrible and very contagious. And I think people don't think it's terrible because they don't remember when it was terrible. But it's not the only one. I mean, what if polio makes a recurrence? I mean, they're not interested in any of this. No, they're not. And, you know, I mean, thank goodness, you know, we always thank Jonas Salk for, you know, making that polio vaccine the property of the world. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, anything could come back, and we could easily have another pandemic, and I don't think Trump would be any more prepared this time than the last time.
Would America? How would we deal with that?
Oh, I think it would be worse than last time. I think that the anti-vax mania with Trump in office would be far worse than you know, the next time around. Yeah, I don't know. Let's not even talk about that. That's too grim a scenario to wrap our heads around. Okay,
well, let's talk about something else. The Supreme Court, 9-0. I mean, they should never have taken it in the first place but they're trying to find a path. Roberts is trying to find a path where he doesn't end up in a war with Donald Trump. Yeah. And he cannot, for the life of himself, continue on a path that says the Supreme Court gets more and more power every year because that's what he's done. And the president gets more and more power every second because that's what he wants. They're on a collision course. And I don't know if Roberts knows this yet, but they're on a collision course. And so this time they, as politely as possible, said, we're going to ask you to try, please, to obey the law and go find the guy you sent for no reason, no reason at all, and in fact illegally to El Salvador, and bring him back. And then you could send him anywhere else you want in the world, but you can't send him there. And they went to court and said, we don't know where he is. I mean, we don't know where he is, and we don't know what we're doing to get him back. This is perilously close to saying to John Roberts, you don't count.
It is, yeah. Maybe more than perilously close. They were in court. The Supreme Court gave us that decision on Thursday, and the administration was in court on Friday, essentially saying, no, it's not our responsibility to do this. Yeah. So that's open defiance of the Supreme Court. Now, as you say, the Supreme Court, I didn't read it, and I'm not a lawyer. So, but from what I did read, you know, the Supreme Court's order was, as you said, polite, and gave the administration a little wiggle room, but they did say develop a plan to bring this guy back. And the thing about this is that, as you just said, they could bring him back and, through lawful means, deport him to somewhere else.
Yep. Or through lawful means, challenge the ban on sending him to El Salvador and have it lifted. I mean,
Right.
there are lawful paths to do things, even bad things.
To do bad things to the guy. There are the two lawful paths we just mentioned, and they won't even do them.
No. So I mean, and Roberts has I think tried in every possible way to be conciliatory, to avoid a fight, but he can't be a Supreme Court judge and completely ignore the plain face of the law. I mean, he can't. He can try and be creative around some of it, but at the end of the day, that's not going to happen. They're going to actually say, "Well, I'm sorry. You can't just pretend that people don't have any rights and you're a king." And that I don't see how they don't have an enormous crash in the next few months.
I agree. It seems likely, and but what's the court going to do? What are we going to do? What is the United States of America going to do? Because Trump's going to ignore. If the Supreme Court holds against him and Trump ignores it, then what?
Well, I think all of this is about. I mean, we can't have a democracy if Americans don't want one, but I suspect we do. I suspect we are not ready to dishonor everyone who fought so hard to keep that light lit in our country and around the world for the last couple hundred years. So I think we'll just get angrier and angrier, and the turnout and the voting, not even with the lies on massive right-wing media, aren't going to make it possible for them to claim victory in every election. And I think we win. And only then do I think we can we have some power to impose consequences.
That's right. And, there are elections around the corner, presumably.
Yeah.
The odds are likely that the Democrats will recapture the House. I don't think it's a given. The average since Roosevelt's time in this first term is 26 seats for the out party. But we've entered an era where there are fewer and fewer swing districts. Yes. Fewer and fewer competitive seats. So, if the Democrats gained 15, that would be, a big win. Oh, they need 3, right?
Right.
So I do think they'll probably take the House, and I think that'll put some brakes on some of this stuff.
My fear, because if we do not think of the worst, we can't prevent the worst. So forgive me for fantasizing about the worst, but I think this executive order of the president's that basically says, I am by executive order making the SAVE Act law, that when the Democrats win the next election, he's going to say to Mike Johnson, you can't seat these people because they were illegally elected. And we are going to have that fight.
Oh, boy.
You cannot, no matter how I have worked my imagination to imagine the worst, they keep going lower. So, the bad guys can think of things that the good guys just don't even think of. Yeah.
And they'll always come up with something. And but boy, that's a scenario I hadn't contemplated. And we can't say any scenario is too outlandish for these people.
No, not. Well, Michael, we've run out of time. I just want to tell you how important I find the New Republic, how more valuable it's been than in many years. I mean, like any old, long-standing publication, it goes through its moments, some, more powerful and important than others, and right now is one of those moments. Thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that. It's really, really kind of you. And come to TNR.com, folks. Have a look.
Yep. All right. We will talk again. You take care.
Thanks, Edwin. Be well.
Yep. We're going to take a break for the news, and Dean Baker is going to join us when we come back to talk about the chaos in the economy. You're going to want to hear it.
You're looking at the big picture with Edwin Eisendrath on WCPT 820.
Okay, welcome back. The big picture. Big picture is kind of ugly right now. Dean Baker, founder of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, prolific writer, book author of, actual economic studies as opposed to the fake stuff that is so happy around the administration these days. He is often here to explain economics to the rest of us, and he's here again. Dean, welcome.
Thanks for having me on, Edwin.
I'm glad you're here. Okay, so just this morning, the madman in the White House amended his tariffs, this time exempting, I guess, computers, phones, who knows. Chinese-made laptops now have lower tariffs. Chinese batteries in laptops, I guess, aren't tariffed, but if you just buy the battery separately, it is. None of this makes any sense. I mean, certainly doesn't make economics. What's going on?
Well, I think the only way to understand Trump here is that he's not making any sense. Now, in terms of why he might have done this, two things. One is these are obviously very popular items, and people would freak seeing that the next smartphone they want to get is going to cost them $3,000. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is that, Tim Cook and some other tech bros handed Trump a lot of money. I mean, basically, he's open about that. Come to Mar-a-Lago, give money to my whatever, his campaign fund, his charities, his library, or God knows what they'll be in there. He's open on that. He's open, he just about, comes right out and say, come to me and, kiss my ass and, I'll do you a favor. So both of those are possibilities. But the one thing we could say is economic policy. No, this makes zero sense. Many of us were saying that all along with the tariffs, that you could make arguments for selective tariffs. And, obviously the Biden administration had them and, we could debate them, but they were clearly arguable. I mean, you could say it was that, it's good to, have tariffs to try and protect our electric vehicle industry, to try and protect clean, again, you can argue either side, but there's at least an argument there. But having cross-the-board tariffs, what exactly did he hope to do? And then when he has reciprocal tariffs, like those weren't reciprocal, they bore no relation to anything. I mean, he had 10% tariffs on these uninhabited islands in Antarctica. I'll come back to that. But anyhow, there's not a coherent policy, and people are trying to find one. They're wasting their time. And if there was ever any doubt, I mean, the doubts have already been dispelled, but just exempting really big items from China, the one he's beating up on more than anyone, that makes zero sense.
So the whole world now knows that, pay no attention to the man behind the curtain, that we're learning that the man behind the curtain is a petty mobster and not a talented one at that. That's just, I mean, no one, I'm sorry, I'm rambling a little bit. In economics, in business, in almost every decision you make, you have to trust who's across the table. You have to have some sense of stability. You have to be able to plan before you invest a lot of money. I just think that this is an enormous chill on investment in everything American, in our bonds, in our equities, just in everything, because who trusts this guy? No one. And who thinks there's any stability that you can plan? No one.
Yeah. I've said before, people talk about him as a businessman. His major claim to fame, the reason why millions of people knew of him when he ran in 2016, well, it wasn't his business success. Most people hadn't, any dealings with his businesses. It was his reality TV show. And that's what he is. He's a reality TV show star. So what do you want in a reality TV show? Well, stay tuned. After the next commercial, we'll let you know who won The Apprentice. And that's fine for reality TV, but that's not a way to run an economy. Exactly as you're saying that, again, let's try and establish some coherence to his policy. Okay, we're going to have real high tariffs. You could argue good or bad. But the one thing, if your point is to reindustrialize the country, and again, I and others have argued that really isn't a very plausible story, but if that's your point, the one thing you want to do is make sure people know those tariffs are real and they will be there. Because no one in their right mind is going to spend hundreds of millions, maybe billions of dollars setting up a factory in the United States when they don't know that the tariffs that make that economically feasible are going to be there for 5 years or 10 years. And if they might be gone in a week because, someone came by and kissed Trump's ass, you'd be crazy to do that. And most of these people run businesses, I'm not saying great things about them. They're not geniuses. But most of them aren't crazy. That's why this doesn't work as economic policy.
Let's talk about something that I'm just going to need some explaining for all of us, me and everybody listening. But this notion of the bond prices also going down at the same time, equity values are going down. This threat of stagflation, and so I want to talk about that, and then I want to talk to you about the impact that massive shortfalls in government revenue because of the changes in the IRS and upcoming tax cuts will have on all of this.
Yeah, well, so the issue of the bond prices. So what happened, as you recall, we had the markets crashing, last week. And then Trump did this big reversal where he said, everyone's kissing my ass. I mean, this is what he said. He did say this. I'm not putting words in his mouth. He did say this. So as it turns out, I'm going to put off what he called retaliatory tariffs for 90 days. And then, of course, the stock market rallied. It had a big went up, I think, 9.9%. And, the question I and others had was how many people had he told of that in advance, because why wouldn't he, and why wouldn't his friends trade on it? I mean, it's totally illegal, but no one's enforcing those laws now. So why wouldn't they? But the other part of that story, and this is what a number of economists, a number of us call attention to, bond prices still fell. So here you have a situation where the stock market's rallying. You would have expected, this is good news, the bond market to rally as well, and it didn't. It went the other way. Bond prices fell, and they actually fell a lot. So the conventional view, and I'm not going to say it's right, I'm not an expert, no one knows what's in traders' minds, but the stock market tends to be more volatile, more driven by, temperament, and I'll just use that as the word, that whereas the bond market, it's not, I don't know many people that trade in bonds. I don't know that many people trade in stocks. I know more people who, will trade in stocks and bonds, I'll put it that way. So the bond market tends to be more professional investors, institutional investors, and they respond less to news, more to fundamentals, less to, the day's gossip, I'll put it that way. So the story is that they were looking at the bond investors were saying, this is not a stable economy. So historically, of course, the United States was thought to be rock bed stable. People could trust the United States. They could count, that we'll have stable policy. They could, put their money in a 10-year, 30-year treasury. They don't have to worry about it because we have a stable economy. This was not the workings of a stable economy. So you had, basically the professional investors saying, we want out, we're going to demand higher yields on U.S. bonds. And I should also point out the dollar fell. So the dollar fell a lot against the euro and other major currencies. So again, currency traders, the idea is, and I'm not going to vouch for it, but the idea is that these are more professional traders. They're not moved by, gossip of today or gossip of tomorrow. They're looking at the fundamentals and they're saying, this is not good. So that was the story there. Now, the longer-term issue is, okay, well, are we going to face higher interest rates down the road because, they're wary, we don't have a stable government, We have like a third-world government that, can't be relied on. And the issue you raised with the IRS, that's directly part of that because in third-world governments, if you look at the tax collections, a lot of these countries have very high tax rates, but they don't get any taxes. Because there's no enforcement. People have payoffs or there's no enforcement anyhow, so they have to make payoffs. Well, you got the IRS, and that's where we are here. And tax collections are way down from where they were last year. And that's not the ordinary person. Most of us, we pay our taxes because it's deducted from our paycheck, even if we wanted to, not pay them. I mean, we could put in a phony tax return and tell the IRS, oh, no, I actually didn't work last year. That was all bullshit. Send me my money back. Maybe some people will do that. I don't know. I wouldn't count on getting it back. But, the people who get away with not paying taxes are people who get millions of dollars a year in income from owning a business, from owning stock or other financial assets, and those people aren't paying it. Now, maybe at the end of the day, we will get the money from them, but if there's no one at the IRS to be the cop, I wouldn't bet on it. If you make taxes voluntary, a lot of people will choose not to pay them.
So, okay, and then you add to that enormous promised set of tax cuts that will spike the debt of the United States the deficit will go way up and our debt will go further way up. At some point we stretch credulity to think that we'll be able to pay our creditors. And I don't see how long-term economic decline doesn't follow.
Well, I'm a little less, I am somewhat concerned about that. I mean, basically, if people don't think we could collect our taxes, that I think is the biggest issue. I'm less worried about the deficit in a given year. And frankly, he just hit us with big tax increases. They're all on working people. I mean, let's be 100% clear. Tariffs are another word for import taxes. So he's hitting working people with a lot of big import taxes. And again, I wish I could tell you how much, but it changes by the day. So we just exempted all these products. So I don't have a number to tell you. It's probably $200 or $300 billion, which would ordinarily say is a really big number, but it's a lot less than what we were looking at before he rolled back his tariffs. So, so in any case, we are going to get a lot of revenue. Does that offset his tax cuts for the rich? Probably not. But the bigger issue there is, as I say, if you make taxes voluntary for them, we're going to lose a huge amount of revenue, and that's where you really do run a situation where people do stop respecting us as a credible borrower. So that's I think the biggest issue.
I don't even know how the government collects the tariffs because I worked in government. People work in government are smart, they work hard, but no one can keep up with, wait a minute, today I'm supposed to collect this tax, but tomorrow I'm not, but Thursday it's back on, but next week it's a different amount. You can't make an organization work that way.
Well, that's where I said I was going to come back to the uninhabited islands that were imposed at 10% tax. Howard Lutnick, is of course the Commerce Secretary and been very visible spokesperson on these tariffs. He was defending that. This is again speaks to the administration. They cannot acknowledge a mistake. They haven't learned how to. I don't know. My mother taught me when I was very young. When you make a mistake, you go, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake." It's not hard, but they haven't learned how to do that. So instead of saying, "Oh yeah, that was a mistake," he said, "Oh no, we did that because we knew that people would try to game the system." So China is going to send things through these uninhabited islands, and in order to prevent that, we put a 10% tax on their exports to us. And you go, okay, let's try and take Mr. Lutnick seriously for a second. There's actually thousands, but probably tens of thousands of uninhabited islands in the world. Maybe they'll send it from the other uninhabited islands. But again, being a little more serious, transshipment of goods is actually a really big problem when you have these big tariffs. And for the most part, they're not going to be trying to do it because they aren't idiots. They're not going to be saying, oh, it came from these uninhabited islands, which apparently Lutnick is worried they're going to do. What they're going to do is we have a 154% tariff on goods from China. We have a 10% tariff on goods from Thailand. Well, guess what? They take the goods from China, they send it to Thailand, it comes over from Thailand, it's 10% tariff. Now, if you're saying that your customs people are too inept to figure out that the goods from an uninhabited island didn't actually come from the uninhabited island, how on earth are you going to prevent the transshipment? The goods come and the box will be, I'm sure, will be written in Thai. So how's the customs person going to know that? Now, it could be even more sophisticated. They've already done this. They take a product, they have everything, all the parts produced in China. They have it assembled in Thailand. Well, it actually did come from Thailand. Are you going to tear it apart and figure out how much of the content was from China? I mean, you could do that, but that's going to be incredibly time-consuming and costly.
Right.
So,
blockade running is as old as trade itself, right? And I thought from the moment I heard this that these grifters in the White House were going to actually set up blockade running businesses. You know, that they wanted to control the I don't even know what you call it, the arbitrage on tariff prices.
Yeah. So, I mean, as I say, the tariffs made no sense. And again, it's one of the things, it doesn't take a genius. If you do put in tariffs, you want to make the structure as simple as possible. And instead, they have different tariffs, different countries, different products, same country. It's an utter mess. If you really try to enforce it, we're going to shut off trade altogether. Because what are you going to do? Every box that comes in, you're going to have your people at customs tear it apart, go, okay, well, that's a refrigerator. And they're telling us it's from Thailand, but we have to make sure that all the parts came from Thailand because some might come from China. I mean, that's nuts.
Yeah, you keep going in and out, Dean. If you can get closer to the phone, that'd be great. I agree with you. I mean, until, I don't think it makes any sense. So to go back to your earlier comment, I don't actually think we're going to get the tax revenue from the tariffs. I think Americans are going to pay higher prices for sure, but I'm not sure that's going to translate into more tax revenue for the country.
Well, as I say, it's hard to say. Obviously, the companies here, we saw this in the pandemic with the supply chain issues. They're happy to take advantage of it, and they'll raise their prices, and, it went to profits. We saw that. I mean, the supply chain problems are real, so I don't want to say it was all, they're jacking up their prices, but we know the profit margins went up, and they're still higher. So you could be damn sure that, companies will say, oh, we have to pay this big tariff that, that we have in place now from Liberation Day, and, and they'll jack up their prices. Yeah, so I don't know. You're right. I have no idea how much money we'll end up collecting at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, I'm watching for Jared to have an import business. That's when I'll know that, it's all rigged.
I wouldn't be surprised.
But just that we can say that is a sign that nobody trusts these guys. And that all of that, economies are built on trust as much as anything else. You can't trade with somebody you don't trust.
Yeah, well, and, keep in mind, let's go back. I was talking about Trump being a TV show host, but that's not fair. He was a business person, and no one trusted him. Because he stiffed his contractors, that was well known. So he had to pay his contractors in advance because no one in their right mind would, put in all this work to, get the materials and everything, and then wait for Trump to send them a check. Because he would, or, maybe he'd send them half, and they'd say, oh, sue me for the rest. And they knew that he'd, tie it up in court for the rest of their lives. So they'd be happy getting half. So contractors wouldn't work for him. They wanted the money in advance. Same with his lawyers. They say, pay me in advance because he'd stiff his lawyers.
And contracts are the cornerstone of business and economies, and he doesn't seem to honor those. He personally, signed the treaties that govern trade between Mexico and Canada and the United States. He negotiated those treaties. He signed those treaties in his first term, and he tore them up. He's like, I don't care that I signed it. It's irrelevant.
Yeah, well, he condemned them. He's saying these were negotiated by morons, which he might have been correct, but yeah.
But they were his morons. Yeah.
So, again, it's the sort of thing, obviously, other countries, they're paying attention, and they know at this point that, you can negotiate a deal with Trump, but it's basically worthless. Maybe he'll honor it for a day, 2 days, a week, 2 weeks, but he can get angry and he'll just tear it up and go, oh, yeah, this so-and-so says, if you think of the EU and France, Macron made a joke about me, so forget that. That's the way he operates.
Is there any good news?
Well, you can decide whether it's good or bad. I am, at the end of the day, happy he's backing down on these policies because they were absolutely crazy. They're still crazy, but they're less, a 10% tariff is less harmful than, the 50% tariffs he had on, Vietnam and, concerned about us, concerned about them. It's crazy policies. So I'm glad he's backing down, which also, I think people should take some heart in that he does respond to pressure. So, we have had big protests. I know I was out last weekend. A lot of people were out last weekend protesting. He does respond to pressure. So, that's a really, really important point because, obviously he doesn't feel obligated to follow the law. He's happy to just flout the law. He doesn't care. We saw this in the immigration case. It's just horrible. It's innocent guys in a hellhole prison in El Salvador. And he's just going, so what? But he does respond to pressure. So, we should see that as an opportunity. Keep the pressure up, put the pressure on the members of Congress, for the Democrats to speak up and the Republicans to, pretend they have a brain, they will respond.
Yeah. In this case, I was happy to see, it was a TV show when I was little, but I was happy to see Flipper back. And, he's like, I'm going this way. No, wait, I'm going that way. Throw me the fish. Flipper, it's fine with me if he decides that I got to do something different. But you can't still count on any of it, which is just, I'm learning. I talked to somebody earlier, Dean, and I thought maybe the silver lining in some of this is that Americans who've been taught since Reagan that government is the problem are finally learning, because really good people are being fired and the government's not doing things it should do, that maybe the idea of keeping planes safe in the air, keeping us safe from diseases, making our food safe, keeping the highways running, making sure Social Security gets paid, making sure the rich pay some taxes, that these aren't actually terrible things.
Yeah, and part of the thing is actually the success of government in the sense that the planes aren't crashing. Well, what's to see?
Mm-hmm.
We don't think about it. When the planes are crashing now, people think about it. I know people are scared to fly. I'm more scared to fly. I'm still flying, but it's definitely. I'm less confident now than I would ordinarily be, and we're food safety. Thankfully we haven't had any big outbreaks of E. coli or whatever, but it won't surprise me because they're firing the people that monitor it, and we do have the measles outbreak because we have RFK Jr. pretending that the measles vaccine doesn't work. I'm an economist. I'm used to looking at evidence. You never see evidence in economics as solid as the evidence that the measles vaccine is effective against measles. Never see anything that's solid. But government ordinarily works, so we don't see it.
Right, and this summer you have a combination of the FAA cuts, and then all the cuts to NOAA and the Weather Service. I wouldn't want to be a pilot, not knowing where the storms are, not knowing. So the data's going to be gone. There are going to be delays no one expects. What a nightmare.
Yeah, and again, it just speaks ordinarily these things work. Obviously we get bad weather. That's not the government's doing. But the thing is we want to know about it. And, when you have a situation where the people would be telling us have been laid off, there'll be a lot of cases where you don't know about it where we could have.
Yeah. Well, the economy was not that long ago in pretty good shape. Some argue that it was artificially strong because of the government's big balance sheet or because too much spending that needed to be drained. But it takes a lot to take an economy as strong as the one Trump inherited in January and within one quarter to send it in recession. Have you ever seen anything like that?
No, Trump inherited the strongest economy of any president in my lifetime. I can't think of anything that's even close. I go back to the 60s. Even when Nixon came in 68, it was very strong, but we definitely have problems with inflation. Now, you could say inflation was higher than we wanted it to be when Trump came in, but the point was it wasn't that high. It wasn't as high as when Nixon came in. And when Nixon came in, it was heading up. When Trump came in, it was heading down. So you had 4% unemployment, very rapid GDP growth, good real wage growth. So wages were growing more rapidly than prices. And again, inflation coming down. Yeah, that's a really great story. And it looks very likely that we're going to have negative GDP in the first quarter. And that is his fault. I mean, there's no doubt about it. That's because of him.
And I guess also, instead of people earning more than inflation, they're maybe earning less. Purchasing power may go down too.
Yeah, probably not in the first quarter, but very likely in the second quarter. Because first quarter, we haven't seen the impact of tariffs yet because he didn't impose most of them. But we'll start seeing them, come the April data. We are going to see them. And again, we don't know how much because who knows what the tariffs will be. But but we will see. We'll definitely see something.
Well, and by April, you may not have that data. They may have decided that data was a leftist hoax and decided
that's
not to
another
publish
thing
it.
I should mention. This is just incredibly disgusting that they've been going through getting rid of a lot of data. They haven't done much in economics thus far, but we collect data by race, by sex, by Hispanic origin, which is very useful. They may change that, and again, they might literally doctor the data. That's not doctoring it, but that means we won't be able to tell. Has the black unemployment risen relative to white unemployment, or women, less like These are all things that economists, all of us, like to know. And if they don't collect the data, it's going to be hard to know it.
I'm worried about the data. I'm worried about not just collecting it, but its integrity. I'm
worried about that too. I mean, the one thing I'll say is if they mess with the integrity, I know a lot of people in these agencies, they'll quit, which is what they should do. I mean, if they can't produce honest data, they should say that and leave,
Right. But they're quitting in other agencies for similar reasons. They just serially, they're getting one after the other. I mean, our justice system is now, the good people have been quitting.
Yeah, well, Trump says my Justice Department, and that's clearly the way he thinks of it, and that's the way our Attorney General thinks of it. She works for Trump, which is wrong. She works for the American people, but she's acting as though she works for Donald Trump.
Yes. Well, when the economists and the people who produce the numbers on the economy start fudging the numbers, I think there will be massive disinvestment. Because, again, people need...
and you will really see interest rates rise. Because, again, that gets back to, trust in the U.S. And if we're putting out phony numbers, it goes to hell.
Yep. And then you'll know he'll try and take over the Fed to fix the interest rates. But it won't fix the problem because it's a global economy.
If we're putting out phony numbers, there's no way to fix that problem.
Yep.
Well, the way to fix it is put out real numbers.
The way to fix it is to change the administration. And that we can't do fast enough. Dean, a pleasure talking always. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time today.
Sure. Good talking to you again, Edwin. Have a good weekend.
Yep. You too. Bye. Bye. All right, everybody. I know we did some calls earlier in the show, but let's do it again. We'll take a break, and I'll hear from you at 773-763-9278.
Edwin Eisendrath is taking your calls now at 773-763-9278. The Big Picture is on now. WCPT 820.
Hello, Greg. What's on your mind?
Well, good afternoon, sir. I'm going to pretend I'm not ignorant and say that it should be explained for other citizens and ask, I wish you could get somebody or yourself, somebody who could really explain how the bond market works. You have 10, 5, 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 30-year bonds, which will get an interest rate from the U.S. Treasury, I guess, when you turn them into. Can that vary? How do people sell these things if there's a fixed interest rate, or there's a gamble that the government's going to pay more when they buy them back, or when you turn them in, because they need the money? Or can you please get an expert?
Here, sure, but let me explain it to you in a way that is easier than an expert will. The reason why the interest rates on a fixed interest thing look like they go up and down, if I buy a bond and it pays 5%, when I turn it in 10 years, I get 5% on what I originally invested. But any time during at any time during the course of that time, I can sell the bonds to you and say I paid $100 for it. If you then pay me $200 for the same bond, the fixed interest rate on my 100 is going to be worth half as much to you. In that case, it looks like the interest rate on the bond goes down because the bond rates are dependent on what you sell it for. And during the course of the life of the bond, the price that you can sell it for goes up and down. So although the interest rate is fixed, since the cost of the bond goes up and down, that's why it looks like the interest rates change.
How does the cost of the bond go up and down when it's issued by the Treasury or by
simple.
the Federal Reserve? By the Treasury,
cost,
right?
The initial cost doesn't change. What I paid for it when I got it, when it first was issued, never changes. But if a year in, I decide I don't want to hold it anymore, I decide I think economic conditions are worse or better, and I want to sell that bond to somebody else, right? If I paid $100 for it and it's 5%, 10 years later, you get $105 when you turn it in. But $105 is 5% on the $100 I spent. If you give me just $50 for it, if I sell it at a huge loss to you for $50, you get $105 in the end. You're getting a 10%. I'm sorry, you're getting like 10% interest. That's why it looks like the interest rates change.
I see. So people can cash out at a loss because they need the capital now,
or at a gain. Because people are always betting on all the parts of the economy. So your bond, whenever you buy this debt, which is what it is, you're making a loan to the government, and somebody the government owes you money, and that debt you can sell to somebody else at whatever the market price is for that debt.
I'm getting the picture. Who issues it, the Treasury or the Fed?
Well, there are different kinds of bills. They're notes, they're bonds.
What?
Lots of people do. I mean, by the way, so do corporations. Anybody, it's one of the ways people borrow money.
That's true.
So there are lots and lots and lots. Right?
I see. But U.S. Treasury bonds are by the U.S. Treasury, not the Fed. The Fed can buy these from the Federal Reserve
Treasury.
through quantitative easing or when they get more money in circulation.
Correct.
And then they'll have loans that are at a higher rate than they have to pay back the government. That's how the banks make their money in the process.
Yeah. So you see, it's not that complicated.
All right. We'll talk. Thank you very much. Bye.
You bet. All right, Eduardo, you're next.
Edwin, yes. Good afternoon. Well, I was on your screener. I read something where we have some troops over there in Panama, and then we got some B-2 something over there in near Iran. We're having talks over there. I don't think it's a good idea to be having any kind of military presence over there. If anything, I think Mr. Maduro would be better pressured to be ousted, and we have a better, more democratic government there. So, things flow better in the future in that country. I think it would help the Latin American, South American continent much better.
I don't disagree. Look, what we're doing in Panama, who knows what they're doing? I mean, defense is important, but these guys, I don't trust them. So they just, forget Panama for a minute. They've just issued an order that says for a strip running the length of our border with Mexico is now U.S. military land. They've turned it into land for the military so that he can order the military down there to, I don't know, it's now all a military base. So if somebody comes on it unwelcome, they can get shot, and they can build a wall using the military budget because he couldn't get Congress to pay for it. But while he's completely wasting the resources, and no wonder he wants a huge hike in the defense appropriation, because he's wasting billions of dollars sending troops to the border with Mexico to build his wall or to do who knows what, because there's some invasion that there isn't. And then this thing with Panama, for God's sake, Panama's not our enemy. They're not, a threat to us. And the Chinese were managing things down there weren't a threat to us. It's utter nonsense. And I'm glad you raised this. He's negotiating with Iran. He tore up a deal with Iran. Now he thinks he can get a better one out of the deal, right? So far, nothing. He said he would get us out of, he said he would bring peace to Ukraine on day one. 100 days in-ish, no peace, but his team is floating. Let's partition the country like Berlin after World War II. Yeah, the Ukrainians aren't going to say yes to that. Europe isn't going to say yes to that. It shows that he wants peace at any cost. just to say he made peace. This isn't peace. And we were going to have an end to the troubles in the Middle East, right? We was going to help Palestine overcome, the incredible destruction there and keep the Israelis safe so that October 7th never happens again. And that hasn't happened either. So the man, I'm so glad you brought this up, because just one more instance where this idiot pretending that he knows everything is putting all of us in danger. I'm sorry. Yeah. I don't feel strongly about this.
All right, Edwin. Thank you very much.
You bet. All right, I'm at 773-763-9278 if you want to join the conversation. And this foreign policy stuff is wild, right? He's got now, we don't know how many signal chats have been, where our plans have been out there for everybody to see. I assume that Russia and China know what we're planning now. Our head of national intelligence doesn't know what classifications of classified documents mean. Her testimony was wild, Tulsi Gabbard's. So just from the top, it's ridiculous. And now we're going to spend all this time and money moving troops to the border to, I don't know, shoot people that they think, don't look like they belong, taking a stroll by the Rio Grande, and build a wall and do God knows what for how much money? This is massively incompetent. Meanwhile, all that peace he was going to break out in the world, not happening. Not happening. In fact, the evidence is that, we're going to see countries look for nuclear weapons like they've never had. The world is getting more dangerous on his watch by the minute. By the minute. And that doesn't even talk about the future that we are losing every day. We're losing it because he's taken a whole generation of scientists out of our labs. What's that about? Really? A whole generation of scholars. Nope, sit on the sidelines. And this generation in particular, when all of the future is being invented from, advancements in AI to quantum computing, there are lots of things, and being massive bioengineering, all of this stuff is going to be done somewhere else. These nice next big companies, the next Apple, the next Microsoft, the next big kind of media stuff, all invented everywhere else. Really frightening and frustrating. And what he's done to our economy, and you heard, we talked to Dean, we talked to everybody else here, makes no economic sense. Literally the only way all of my guests today could understand this is it's just a mob boss who thinks he can put something out there that causes somebody pain, and they'll pay him to take it off. Can we pay him to go away? Is that what he's got? Hang out his shingle? Because that I think, I'm just in shock every day. But I'm not despondent for the reasons I said at the beginning. He's wrecking everything. And you know what? We put ourselves in this mess. But we're not going to stay in this mess. Next week, another rally. Everybody should show up. There are going to be lots of them all summer long. Everybody should show up. Don't for 1 second, even if he's completely or she is completely on our side, do not avoid calling your representatives, your congressmen, your city councilmen, your mayors, everybody who's in public office, and say to them, you need to stand up to this. You need to protect the rule of law. You need to protect our democracy. You just need to say it to everybody. And then you need to go out and demonstrate. And you need to say to everybody if you know anybody in business, hey, if you're looking for a lawyer, there are firms that didn't cave to Trump. Send your business to them. Right? Because we have to protect each other. And soon enough, there'll be elections. And soon enough, we will show up in big enough numbers to end this national nightmare. And, again, I'm interested in what you think we should do once we do win. I, for one, feel like we have to reestablish the rule of law, but I also feel like we have to distance ourselves from these guys. It's not enough to win and pretend everything was normal. Joe did that, and Joe got a lot done, but he didn't cure the virus in the country, not by a long shot. Joe's presidency was there between two of Trump's. So the good stuff he did gets undone. We have to cure the virus. And that means, we got to be tougher than many Democrats have ever been. It isn't all about just get along. And I think back to other sort of right-wing takeovers. And, the one in Israel is a good example. They had a prime minister who had made peace. He was pushing for a comprehensive peace, Yitzhak Rabin, and he was murdered by a right-wing fanatic. And the right and the left wing said, oh, my God, this is going to tear the country apart. We just have to move past. We just have to agree we're going to get along. And while the folks on the left just agreed to get along, the right ate their lunch, and Bibi Netanyahu is their permanent prime minister and, frankly, undermining their democracy in ways that are very similar to what's going on here. Nope. If you care about the rule of law, if you care about democracy, we need to be tougher. We need to be stronger. That's why I like the idea of taking Mar-a-Lago. That's why I like the idea of not seating people who are involved in an insurrection. But there's going to be a reckoning with the Supreme Court before then. John Roberts has spent career saying, more and more the Supreme Court's got to be the one to decide. Congress isn't passing laws, and when they pass laws, we can undo them, like McCain-Feingold. So the Supreme Court's gotten more and more important, said we're more and more powerful. They've been making law from the court. All of it, I don't like any of it, but it is within our legal structure. Now they're faced with a president who stands outside our legal structure and says, I'm a king, and doesn't care about what courts say. They're in for a real reckoning, both of them. They're going to this is not going to hold. And again, the question is, do Americans care? What are Americans going to do? I know what I'm doing, and I hope you are too. Every congressman, every senator, everyone at every level of public life, and I'm talking to everybody I know, on the radio, on the phone, through email, through social media, helping spread the word, telling people what news sources you can trust, telling people what news sources are part of the problem, and explaining why. Really important, and every one of you can do that. What do you think, Sherry? Will you do that?
I will definitely try. Hi there, my baby brother from another mother.
Where are you calling from, Sherry?
I'm calling from Las Vegas.
Oh,
and
nice.
I just had to call. There's some segments of probably almost every radio personality on the show, and I love WCPT. I love it, love it. They kind of go to this, oh my God, is this the country that we're living in? I'm saying yes. I said, ask the Native Americans, okay? Yeah, this is the country that we, that we live in. Ask, people of color, whether they're, from Africa or Italy or whatever that wasn't, Anglo-Saxon. This is something that we're used to. Yeah, this is our America. It has been for a long, long, long time. That's why, when I hear these folks, oh my God, I just can't believe. Sometimes, Edwin, and I say this from the bottom of my heart, it hurts me sometimes. I have to turn the radio off because it's like, oh my God, have you guys been living, in a cave somewhere? Then I thought, okay, Sherry, maybe that's just, for theater. You know what I mean? To kind of maybe spur some type of conversation. But it's like, no, you guys are intelligent. And if you're telling me that this is part of an act I don't want to listen to the show. Sometimes I have to turn them off.
No, that's fair. And I had a similar conversation last week at the end of my show, and I hope you got to hear that. But somebody expressed a similar point. For America's had these two strands forever, right? One of power and control, and it has been in the hands of one portion of our population and at the expense of everyone, but really at the expense of Native Americans, of Black Americans, of immigrants, women,
right.
No question, absolutely no question.
Right.
It's had this other strand too.
I just want to make sure that you know that I include folks that came over from Italy or from Ireland or whatever.
Yeah,
anybody that
too.
doesn't that wasn't from England.
Yeah.
Or Germany. So
right.
yeah.
And the lesson I take from that, because we've gotten better, we have a ways to go, but every time we've gotten better, it's because the people have come together and demanded we get better. I mean, the civil rights movement in the 1960s stood on the shoulders of work that Black Americans who came home from World War II, who said, I'm sorry, this country just said we fought tyranny for freedom. Where's mine? And they laid the groundwork for it. It took years, right, for a big civil rights movement that then changed some laws that the Supreme Court's trying to undo. But so it gives the fact that we have had an imperfect and cruel history to overcome, that strain has always been with us, makes me more proud of the other strain in our country that says we aspire to be better and we work hard to be better and we will not fail, because that's where I think we're facing that right now. It's a dark time like there have been in the past. And you're right to point out that some of the people who are thinking it's a dark time have in the past been privileged and hadn't had to notice.
Okay, but one thing I want to make clear: this is not isolated to the United States. There are other countries around the world who've had whatever policies in regards to folks that don't look like them. So I just want to make that
That's
abundantly clear. But and one thing that kind of hurts me, but I'm glad, is that my mother, who was raised in the South and dealt with all types of obstacles, she didn't have to go through this again. This level of how can I put it?
Hate.
Ostracized.
Hate.
Go ahead.
Hate.
This level of hate is very, very different. There's an undercurrent, and unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't realize it's there. And I know because, everybody's trying to, go through living their lives, and they have family and jobs and and all that stuff, and they don't listen to WCPT like I do from 4 o'clock in the morning till 3 o'clock in the morning here in Las Vegas. I mean, I listen to everybody, and that part, I understand, but I'm just really kind of disheartened that, unfortunately, as Americans, we've gone back to that one emotion that spurs us into action, regardless. And unfortunately, Edwin, that's hate.
Well, I think I don't agree.
Okay.
I think we are seeing hate for sure. and a whole bunch of what's coming from this. I mean, this administration thinks we can talk about the Underground Railroad without mentioning Sojourner Truth. That is so absurd and so hateful, and just, their vision of our past and our future is repulsive. But it isn't. It is that we know better, that we see each other, that we value each other. That is the reason we are going to beat them, and it's the same reason we beat them every time.
Okay, that part I understand, but you're talking about an administration that a lot of people who still had that hate or and antagonistic view of people that don't look like them, they voted him into office, and that's what.
It's appalling. I think they did it for a lot of reasons. It's appalling.
Okay.
I mean, but he didn't, he didn't win by the way, I think I said Sojourner Truth, and I think I meant Harriet Tubman. Excuse me.
Sisters, I mean,
they want to erase both of them. So just to be clear, they want to erase them both.
I know.
Look, we didn't have a primary. We didn't have our act together with that transition from Joe. We didn't give Kamala enough time. She didn't get tested in a primary, and he barely won. He didn't win a big mandate. So, I mean, everything conspired against us this last time. But I don't believe, and the country right now and all the polling, he's underwater. Nobody thinks he's a genius anymore. I think there's going to be a reckoning, and we're going to remind ourselves what we love.
I hope and pray. I really do. I never thought that my generation would have to go, and your generation would have to go through what our parents and our grandparents, had to go through, back in the 1900s or the 1800s. Anyway, I love your show. Who was that guest that you had on before your last one?
Michael Tomasky. He is that one. You talking about Michael, or are you talking about Dave Roberts?
Okay, who's the guy that's just super, super, super smart? It was the guy before your last person.
Yeah, Michael Tomasky. He is the editor of the New Republic. And
I love him.
Well, go online and look at the New Republic. You're going to like it. Let me just, on the topic of you didn't think we should be here again, tonight is for Jewish people, the first night of the holiday of Passover. And at Passover, we say, that's my tribe, every single person, every single one has to live in full knowledge that it wasn't your great ancestors, but it was you that was a slave in Egypt, and it was you that had to fight to be somebody else. That experience has to be as fresh in your soul today, a couple thousand years later, as it would, and because otherwise you do not understand that everybody's a stranger in a strange land, and you have to help them.
True. And unfortunately, that we are bombarded with stuff every day, almost every news cycle, every minute of the news cycle. Unfortunately, that goes to the back of our mind because we're so, and reactionary to what's going on now. But you know something? I will remember your words, and when I get all hyped up, I will kind of zen back to what you just said.
Stay hyped up until we actually accomplish it. We have a big fight, for sure. I think we're going to win, but it's a fight. All right, thank you so much for calling and for listening, and thank all of you for being with me today. I apologize for the gaping hole in my show earlier, but you know what? It's live radio, and sometimes that happens. Thank you for calling in, and I will talk to you next week. In the meantime, keep the faith.